lesbian.
Welcome to today's live stream. It's a Tricast. It covers all the areas that we typically cover on IRA, government sex predators, and also government sex predators. Government sex predators, I mean. So we had a little bit of an echo there in the monitors. And the first thing I want to do is kind of segue into a little clip here of Donald Trump, in which he makes a pretty clear statement.
And again, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote. My beautiful Christians, I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
My. That's quite the statement there, Donald. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how this country is going and how things are headed. And we're going to do it in our usual radioactive, inimitable style of sorts. And we're going to go from there. So those of you who are on this live stream, welcome to our inaugural Tricast, where we cover subject areas and matters that kind of run the gamut of the 3 Substacks that you've grown to know and love. And by the way, we're running an $8 a month subscription deal. If you purchase an $8 a month subscription deal for any one of those 3 Substacks, investigations of ritual abuse, government sex predators, or AntiTribe, you will ultimately receive access to all 3 Substacks. And so here we go. Without further ado, let's talk about what we just saw in that clip. Donald Trump explicitly declaring that he is not, in fact, a Christian. And that's a pretty explicit statement. But wait, there's more. And so as we go into this, we're going to ultimately have ourselves a time here. Because Donald Trump, in addition to saying that he's not a Christian, explicitly stated that he's not going to get in heaven. So here's that clip.
Il y a quelques semaines, vous faisiez une interview et vous disiez que vous espériez mettre fin à la guerre en Ukraine, car cela pourrait vous aider à aller au paradis. Comment cela vous aiderait-il? Cela vous aiderait-il?
Je veux dire, vous savez, je suis un peu gentil. Je ne pense pas que quoi que ce soit puisse me faire aller au paradis, d'accord? Je ne pense vraiment pas que je sois au paradis. Je suis peut-être au paradis en ce moment même, alors que nous pilotons un Air Force One. Je ne suis pas sûr de pouvoir aller au paradis, mais j'ai rendu la vie de beaucoup de gens bien meilleure. Et vous savez, par exemple, si les élections de 2020 n'avaient pas été truquées, des millions de personnes vivraient rien qu'en Russie, rien qu'en Ukraine, cela ne serait jamais arrivé. Et cela n'est pas arrivé pendant 4 ans. Et je connaissais très bien Poutine, c'était la prunelle de ses yeux. Tout ce que j'ai dit ne serait jamais arrivé. Nous avions une administration incompétente. Nous avions un président incompétent. Et à cause d'une élection truquée, des millions de personnes sont mortes. Et d'ailleurs, l'affaire israélienne a été beaucoup plus difficile à régler à cause de l'administration précédente.
Il y a quelques semaines, vous faisiez une interview et vous disiez que vous espériez mettre fin.
Et vous savez, par exemple, si les élections de 2020 n'avaient pas été truquées, des millions de personnes vivraient rien qu'en Russie, rien qu'en Ukraine, cela ne serait jamais arrivé. Et cela n'est
Okay, this is some French speaking there. I don't know if you caught um, the initial clip there, in which Trump declares on Air Force One that he's probably not going to get into heaven. Later on in a different clip, he says, "I was joking," because that's something to joke about. Um, Going to hell. So let's see. Let's see if we can get this one to play without any issue. And
in October, you were asked about ending wars, and you talked about that, and you said, I don't think there's anything that's going to get me into heaven. I think I'm not maybe heaven bound. A lot of Christians were sort of sad to hear that, because Christ came to forgive our sins, if you believe that as Christians, and they open heaven to all of us. So don't you believe that?
So the other day, the New York Times did a story and took that statement totally literally. When I made that statement, I was being funny, sarcastic. It's bad for a politician to be sarcastic. I said, I'm never going to make it to heaven. A big audience. I don't think I can make it. I don't think I qualify, etc. I was kidding. I was having fun. I don't know if I will or not. I don't know.
So there it is. There's Donald Trump talking about how he's not going to heaven, but he was joking. I mean, on the initial remarks that he made, which segued nicely from his declaration that he's not a Christian. He said that he wasn't going to heaven. There wasn't really a way for him to get into heaven. And in the aftermath of the Epstein Files release and all the obfuscation there, I think most of us probably agree with him. What we've seen in terms of like the 1% of those files that has come out, probably not going to heaven. Probably not a Christian, based on the fact that he's a chronic philanderer who cheated on all of his wives. And no matter what anybody in Israel wants to say, and nobody in Trump's base wants to say, he's not King David. He's not Solomon. He's not a man after God's own heart. This is a guy who's been corrupt his entire life and has shown little, if any, repentance about it. And, of course, in that interview with Laura Ingraham, who is herself infamous on the conservative side as being a single woman with children that she adopted. She did not conceive. Because here's the thing, lesbians don't conceive children no matter how hard they have sex with each other. And people who think I'm being crude, I really don't care. So let's make my point on that clear.
Lesbian.
Here we go.
Lesbian.
Yeah. Lesbian. That's from the show. That's from the show Boston Legal, in which James Spader's character Alan Shore makes fun of another character named Brad Chase's discomfiture over the word lesbian. Speaking of lesbians, this past week the news cycle has been dominated by the death of an anti-ICE protester named Renee Good, who was shot and killed after she allegedly, definitely if you looked at the footage from the officer's body cam, or the agent's body cam, she tried to run him over with her Honda Pilot while her lesbian wife looked on. Now, Miss Good leaves behind 3 children, who she should have considered before she made such a stupid decision. But she didn't, and of course she's been held up as the next George Floyd. Not quite George Floyd because she's not black and lesbian, but because she's white and lesbian. And so as we continue on our wide-ranging podcast, what we're seeing here is the gloriousness of lesbians. And so as we continue going that route and everything, like, let's talk about lesbians. Let's talk about minorities. Let's talk about why Miss Good was at a protest to begin with. What we have seen out of Minnesota is potentially $9 billion worth of fraud and counting. And that is, they were forming fake daycares and autism centers in the state of Minnesota, and they were filing claims with the government for government funds for daycare services that they purportedly provided to the Somali community, as well as autism services that they provided to the Somali community and to the wider community in Minnesota, which they didn't actually provide. That's called fraud. As it turns out, they were remitting billions back to Somalia, and ultimately, they stole an amount of money that was equal to or in excess of the entire gross domestic product of the country of Somalia. And so what you're seeing is greater examination, greater scrutiny of that community. You're seeing that there are laws against fraud that are actually going to be enforced as the press has unraveled this, and it's largely the independent press. What we're seeing here is a situation where the mainstream media didn't uncover the $9 billion in fraud. Governor Tim Walz actively suppressed any attempt to investigate and expose that fraud. And the people of Minnesota and the people of the United States, the people who actually pay taxes, the people in the 50% of Americans who actually pay taxes on their income, they were the ones forced to foot the bill for this $9 billion, a lot of which was siphoned off to two places. One is it was recycled or redonated back to Democratic politicians who oversaw this fraud and who suppressed any attempt to investigate it. And the other is Somalia, or Somalian nationals who pocketed the cash and became rich in the process. And so in America, one of the things that I want to drive home to you is that the line items in the budget are telling. If you believe that they're spending millions, if not billions, on things like turtle tunnels and studying lesbian obesity, you're out of your mind. That money is being laundered back into the pockets of politicians who ultimately approve those items in the first place. It is a circular laundering operation. Always has been, always will be. We don't have $40 trillion in national debt by accident. That debt has metastasized and grown over time due to fraud. I mean, the Pentagon can't account for trillions in spending. It has never been able to pass an audit. It has never been able to account for its spending. And even the government agencies that can account for their spending, they account for their spending because the line items in their budgets are fraudulent. And because auditors, the fraud is so pervasive and on such a scale that the auditors in question ultimately can't catch it all. So what you're seeing is a bum rush with tax dollars on the part of congressmen and congresswomen, on the part of state officials who receive federal funds to allocate to services that are never provided to citizens, be it Medicaid or Medicare or, any sort of entitlement program whatsoever. We've all seen the news with Feeding Our Future coming out of Minnesota. We barely scratched the surface of that story, and there's so much fraud that it's impossible to catch it all. And that's kind of what our elected leadership and the permanent bureaucracy counts on at the local, state, and federal level is the amount of criminal activity that they're engaged in is on such a scale that they ultimately don't have to worry about all of it being caught. A small percentage of it will be caught. Few people will receive a slap on the wrist, and we saw Somalians who were defendants in fraud cases in Minnesota have their verdicts overturned by a judge. So a jury convicted them so that the government proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt, and the judge in Minnesota overturned the verdict. And ultimately, those defendants are going free. Now, the prosecution is appealing the judge's decision, but that's the level that we're at, and not just in Minnesota, but in the country as a whole. That's where we're at. That's what we're dealing with, is fraud in the tens, if not hundreds of billions. Realistically, I would say you're probably looking at a situation where the government's budget is about a third fraudulent. That is, the government officials in a spending bill, one of those omnibus spending bills or the budget bills as a whole, enter in some absurd line items such as, studying lesbian obesity for tens of millions of dollars. That money is routed through an institution, an academic who purportedly studies these things, and that academic then turns around and routes that money back into the politician's pocket. That's part of it. Part of that money goes back to the politicians in the form of campaign donations or in the form of spending at some entity, some corporate entity, whether for-profit or non-profit, that benefits either the politician directly, members of their family, or people affiliated with the politician ideologically. So a lot of it will be donated to things like the Tides Foundation, so on and so forth. And the right wing is no better. They do the same thing. They're just not as good at it. Unless, of course, we're talking about national defense, in which case they're exceptional at it. Everybody has their own niche in Washington, in our state capitals. Everybody has their own area of proficiency. And so what we're saying here is ultimately we've reached kind of a tipping point in our society where we're starting to see people die on the streets or die in the streets because they're opposed to enforcing the actual law. And I want to be clear about this. The minute you step foot across our border as a country without a legal reason to do so or without legal permission in the form of a visa or, you're here illegally. You're a criminal. Period. And despite what these white liberal lesbians like Renee Good want to say about it, yes, human beings are illegal. When it's not the human being that's illegal, it's the act that they commit that's illegal. If you murder someone, that's an illegal act. We call you a murderer. If you steal from someone, we call you a thief. If you're here illegally, that is, without a visa, without a work permit, without a green card, or you overstay your visa, guess what? What you did is illegal. No one's saying that a person is illegal. They're saying that what the person did is illegal. And, of course, at the top of the mound, what we have is a president who's eager to leverage this issue for his own political gain and benefit. But he doesn't really give a shit about illegal immigration other than the fact that it's a useful political cudgel against his political opposition. How do I know this? Because he's going after the illegal aliens who are here. This is not a supply issue. This is not illegal aliens walking over the border by the tens of millions. This is a demand issue, and the demand comes from two places. One is the employers who hire someone who's here illegally, and two is the politicians who use this issue as a political cudgel against each other. On the left, Democrats want to say that It's racist to enforce our immigration laws, that we're targeting minorities, people of color, so on and so forth. And these are hardworking people who come here to do the jobs that white people won't do. And, of course, white people won't do those jobs at the rate that illegals will do them in terms of pay and wages, because they can afford to. But an illegal who comes here and who gets thousands of dollars in benefits, who gets a free cell phone and free health care and so on and so forth, they can afford to do those jobs. If they so choose to have a job, they can afford to do that job at a reduced rate of pay. But the benefits that are available to those illegals who come here over the border are not available to citizens, whether they're white, whether they're black, whether they're, Asian. It's not available to a citizen. But they roll out the red carpet for somebody who comes here illegally, and they say they're here to do the jobs that citizens or native-born Americans won't do. And the truth is, of course native-born Americans won't do this. Of course citizens won't do these jobs at that rate of pay because they can't afford to. They're not backstopped by free cell phones and free health care and free benefits and debit cards loaded with $3,000 worth of cash and so on and so forth. We've all heard these outrageous stories. And ultimately, what do you expect when your own president says, I'm not a Christian, I'm not going to heaven, he has no scruples. He thinks that scruples are money in Russia and morals are paintings on walls. That's Trump. And it's not that I'm anti-Trump. It's I'm anti-scum, okay? That guy's in those Epstein files that haven't been released. 99% of them haven't been released, and they're going to slow walk the release all the way through the rest of his administration or until he dies. And even so, you'll never see those files in their entirety. What you'll see, what will be released, will be redacted so heavily that we'll never have a complete story or a complete picture of what went on in Epstein's inner circle. And I think it's telling that some of the stories that have come out about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, who have both broken away from the president on this issue, is that the president purportedly screamed over the phone at Marjorie Taylor Greene that my friends will be hurt. Well, if your friends are raping kids, if your friends are fucking children, they should be hurt. They should be hurt a lot. In fact, they should be executed. But the death penalty is not provided for in these situations in most cases. Certain states like Idaho and Florida are pursuing an incredibly based avenue in which they have imposed the death penalty for people who have sex with children, either under 12 years of age or who rape kids under 14 years of age. The reality of it is, if you rape anybody at all, you should be subject to the death penalty. That should be the law in all 50 states and at the federal level. Sex predators don't rehabilitate. People who rape adults or children don't rehabilitate. And we should treat them as such. Like, at the end of the day, that's what should happen here. And the fact that it hasn't happened is indicative of the fact that at our highest levels, socially, economically, and politically, there are a lot of people who like to have sex with kids. And when you look at the media and the way the media typifies this, they talk about a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old having a relationship, a sexual relationship with an adult. Let me be clear, 12, 13, 14-year-olds don't have relationships with people above 18. They don't have sexual relationships with their teachers or their coaches or their parents' friends or any adult. You know why? Because they're incapable of consenting to such relationships. They're beneath the age of consent for a reason. Cognitively and physically, they haven't developed, and they don't understand the implications of what they're doing, and all they are is sexual chattel to be manipulated by the adult predator who's raping them. So if you're over 18, you're having sex with someone under 18, in most cases you're guilty of rape. Now, they call it statutory rape or they call it child rape. It's just rape. It's rape at all levels. And one of the things that I most have a problem with is someone who's done investigative work in this is that there's any bifurcation between adult rape and child rape whatsoever. Rape is rape. Like, at the end of the day, you're having sex with someone who is either incapable of forming consent or someone who explicitly did not consent and did not tell you yes or told you no. And you still had sex with them. You're a rapist. It doesn't matter if it's a child. It doesn't matter if it's an adult. You're a rapist. You're having sex without consent. And you should be subject to the death penalty. You should be executed for that. Because you're never going to rehabilitate. You're never going to change. At the end of the day, one thing I know, having worked in this space for the better part of 24 years, tracking sexual predators, tracking pedophiles, what I did, they don't change. Tigers don't change their stripes, leopards don't change their spots, and rapists don't stop raping until they die. And it is entirely appropriate for the general population of people who don't rape to expect the government to impose the death penalty on rapists in order to keep the rest of us safe. Our children shouldn't be going to school having, as the media terms it, sexual relationships with their teachers or their coaches. You're supposed to teach the child, not fuck them. Like, that's a basic principle that anyone with any common sense can understand. And quite frankly, I'm kind of sick of reading these headlines. I know a lot of you are. I'm kind of sick of our government's inaction on this issue, which is kind of crystallized in the fact that even though there's a law in place that compels the Department of Justice to release those Epstein files, and the only redactions allowed are the redactions of the victims' names or identifying information, that's clearly not been the case. The executive branch does not intend to comply in good faith with a law passed by Congress and signed into law by Donald Trump. Instead, they've released less than 1% of the files over the past month. They said that they located another 1 million files responsive to Congress's recently passed law. And over that time, what they've done is slow walk the release of files and documents and material that they are legally obligated to release. And they've been pillorying, they've been demonizing people like Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and anybody else who has been outspoken about this. Ro Khanna is another one. They've been targeting them to be terminated in the next election, if not before. Marjorie Taylor Greene has already turned in her resignation. Like, she's already indicated she's not running again. And think about the reality that she used to be a MAGA darling. She used to be full-blown MAGA. And over this issue alone, she discovered her conscience, or rediscovered it, or hell, I don't know. Maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene grew a conscience all of a sudden and realized, hey, I'm in the belly of the beast, and this isn't going to change. This isn't going to improve. And so she tendered her resignation in the form of deciding not to run for re-election. And so what I'd say to people is, there is nothing wrong in this country that 546 well-placed shots couldn't fix. And while we're at it, let's talk about the fact that under 2% of the population is funding the elections. That is, under 2% of the population, according to Open Secrets, which tracks congressional donations and political donations, under 2% of the population funds elections. So if we pull up Open Secrets, which I'm about to do a screen share with you if I can, I'm going to show you how an extreme minority of people fund elections. Now, you may think that your little $25 donation or your small dollar donation is really doing something, and you're part of the grassroots that support all of these MAGA Republicans or these, squad Democrats, so on and so forth. These people who are on the fringe and gradually moving towards positions of power because they're leveraging your support with their grassroots appeal to move into things like the Speaker of the House or chairwomen of committees. They don't actually give a shit about changing policy in any substantive way. But they're going to leverage that rhetoric to get you to throw your support behind them, and so on and so forth. And that's how things are going to work. In the meantime, they're going to get obscenely wealthy in a very short period of time during their tenure in Congress because they can insider trade. That is, they have access to things like who's going to receive federal funds at the corporate level, who's going to receive government contracts, and they invest in advance of it, and they always beat the market. Nancy Pelosi has a better stock market record than Warren Buffett. Think about that. She has a better record of picking stocks because guess what? She has advance notice. Warren Buffett actually has to have skill. Nancy Pelosi knows in advance what's going to happen. So according to Open Secrets, we have total U.S. population, male and female, is a little over 327 million people. And the total of the U.S. population that gives $200+ to election campaigns and political donations is 0.906% for the females and 1.143% for the males. So that means that around 2.04% or so of the U.S. population gives the $200+ donations. Now, if you go further up, and let's say you fix that line at $3,300, what you're looking at is less than 0.25%. 0.25% of the U.S. population that gives these $3,300 and up donations. Now, it gets worse if you bifurcate it by the U.S. adult population. It's 18 and over. And so if it's the adult population, what you see is, that approaches 3% of the U.S. adult population. The percentage of the adult population giving, 3,300 plus, that rises to 0.33%, basically. So 0.33%, that is 3300ths of 1%, dominate our donations, our political campaign donations. And that's as of the 2024 cycle. And so if we drill down for that, we're talking about female donors giving $200 plus. They've given $3.325 billion, and probably 60% of that has gone to Democrats, 30% to Republicans, or 20% to Republicans actually, because it's $750 million versus $1.47 billion if you split it by party. So just female donors alone giving $200 plus. They're giving $3.325 billion, $1.47 billion of which goes to Democrats and The remaining $750 million goes to Republicans. Now, with mail donors give $6.7 billion. And that's split between Democrats, who receive $1.947 billion, and Republicans, who receive roughly $1.765 billion. Now, think about that. Think about the fact that between male and female donors giving $200+ their donations total over $10 billion just for 2024 for those giving more than $200. Now, here's the other thing about political donations. We've had a number of scandals over the past decade where if you go down the list of names on an FEC list for campaign donations, that is the campaign disclosures filed by candidates, and you track down the individuals, they don't know that they've given the money to a particular candidate because they didn't. A lot of those small money donations are, in fact, laundered, and they're putting the name of people who have no affiliation with the campaign, no interest in donating to the campaign, and who have never made a political donation in their life. Again, it's called fraud. But it occurs on such a scale that it's impossible to prosecute it or enforce the law against it. You can catch some of it, but you won't catch all of it. And what I'm saying to you is, in this country, we no longer are a country of one man, one vote. We're a country of $1, one vote. And the consequence of that is seen in places like Minnesota recently with this Somali fraud scandal. It's seen in the Pentagon being unable to pass an audit and being unable to account for trillions of dollars in spending. I mean, the day before 9/11, September 10th, 2001, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld walked up to a podium and admitted that the Pentagon couldn't account for $2.3 trillion in spending. They couldn't tell you where $2.3 trillion of money that it had spent had gone. And the government will always plead corruption, or always plead incompetence to avoid being convicted of corruption. And I'm telling you, they know where that money went because they're the ones that spent it. They just plead incompetence on the back end to avoid being charged with corruption. And they pretend like they aren't aware of where the money is going. The money that they've spent is going. They know exactly where it's going. They just plead ignorance with you and me and the media. And again, the problem here is not just the 546 elected and appointed officials. That is 535 congressmen and congresswomen, the president, the vice president, and the 9th Supreme Court justices. The problem is not just them. It is a permanent, unelected bureaucracy that constantly exploits and leverages these issues to divide us. The reality of it is, how many of you out there support $9 billion in fraud in Minnesota? How many of you support $2.3 trillion in Pentagon funding being unaccounted for, Pentagon spending? When you consider what that money is used for, what the Department of War, as it's now called, uses our tax dollars to do, the fact that $2.3 trillion was missing in 2001 and trillions more have been missing over the decades since, that's staggering. That is absolutely staggering in its implications, because we've all heard the stories of pallets of money being shipped to places like Afghanistan and Iraq to bribe local officials, many of whom obviously are corrupt, but also guilty of atrocities that are just unspeakable against the local population, and they do it because they're bought and paid for by the U.S. government using taxpayer dollars. They do this stuff in our name. And most of us don't support it. They weren't elected with a mandate to do this. No U.S. voter supports Congress being able to engage in insider trading, which any one of us watching this would go to prison for. Martha Stewart did go to prison for it. And Martha's mistake was that she wasn't elected to Congress first. Because if she had done it while she was in Congress, she'd have no criminal penalty whatsoever. Like, at the end of the day, what you're seeing play out in places like Minnesota, where the fraud has come to light, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's 80% of this or more is still concealed underwater. And you know it in your heart and your soul, what you're seeing in the aftermath of it, the pushback, all of these AstroTurf protesters like Renee Good, so on and so forth. Some of them are there because they genuinely believe their own bullshit. But a lot of them are paid agitators. A lot of them are getting paid by these NGOs to go out and raise hell and impede a federal agency doing its job. Because the law is that if you're here legally, and you've, even with a green card, even with a work visa, even with asylum, if you're here and you weren't born on U.S. soil, but you've obtained citizenship through the legal process, but you engage in certain crimes, your citizenship can be revoked and you can be deported. That's the law. I'm not making it up. And that law is in place for a very good reason, because what you see in the Somalian population in Minnesota is just a rampant, blatant disregard for U.S. laws and U.S. customs. You see a contempt for U.S. laws and U.S. customs. And why shouldn't they be contemptuous of us? There's very little in the way of enforcement. There's very little in the way of prosecution, and they know that they're going to get away with it. They know it. They know it because they've gotten away with it in the past, and they know that our government, at a basic level, is incompetent and corrupt, and those two combine for a very potent outcome in terms of $9 billion in fraud being siphoned off and laundered back to the politicians who enabled it, and also laundered back to their country. Now, Treasury Secretary Bessent has frozen remittances to Somalia, but if you think that that's going to stop this, it'll just be laundered through other countries. The U.S. government has frozen EBT benefits or EBT funds for Minnesota. At least temporarily, they're making the cosmetic gesture to freeze those funds until Minnesota drills down and addresses the rampant fraud in their federally funded entitlements programs. And in the meantime, as the boots on the ground try to do their job and enforce the law, you have these protesters like Renee Good, a lesbian, doing what they can to impede and obstruct federal law enforcement. And they're doing it on behalf of a group of people that would execute them on site in Somalia. If Renee Good were to go to Somalia as an openly lesbian individual, Renee Good would be killed. Her partner would be killed. Their children would be killed. A, because she's a lesbian, and B, because she's white. Because on a fundamental level, Somalians, as Muslims, have a very peculiar value system that enables them to commit these atrocities. Many of them fled Somalia to avoid it because they were part of competing factions. They were on the losing side, so they came here seeking asylum, but they weren't any better than the people who supposedly persecuted them. If they had been the dominant faction, they would have visited those same atrocities on other Somalians. And they come here and they visit those atrocities on us. They milk our system. They milk our goodwill. They take advantage of everything that we've established here to help people in order to undercut our society. They ultimately believe that they should be the dominant faction here. Not just as Somalians, but as Muslims. And that value system is fundamentally incompatible with a pluralistic society such as America's, this so-called melting pot. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. That's not going to happen. These people have no intention of assimilating, no intention of abiding by secular value systems that say that you're entitled to worship freely, you're entitled to associate freely, you're entitled to exercise your free speech. The only exercise of free speech that they make as ideological extremists is to undercut and undermine the United States of America. They intend to use their rights to ensure that you and I and anyone who believes and practices differently than them don't have the guarantees of freedom afforded to us in the Bill of Rights. And we don't have a government responsive to securing our rights and liberties. They hate us. They hate this country. And the people who sent them here is a racial and religious cudgel against the Native community. They hate us too. And, you know, it might seem like a rant to say that, but it's the truth. The truth is the people at the very top of the pyramid in the United States hate everybody else. And we see that in our public health system, which has nothing to do with health. It has everything to do with depopulation. We see our public health system in the form of the FDA. That food pyramid that you see in posters on your doctor's office or in your schools, that's exactly what you would feed kids and adults if you wanted them to be pre-diabetic or diabetic, if you wanted them to be morbidly obese. Now, that food pyramid has since been flipped upside down by, you know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The reality of it is, it's just, over 1 million Americans die every year from using prescriptions as directed. That's the reality of our public health system. Your food is designed to make you sick. All that processed garbage that many of you eat, it has stuff in it that's carcinogenic, that's antithetical to human life, human health. You know, the medicine that you take, it's not intended to make you better. It manages your symptoms. There's no money in a cure. There's no money in prevention other than the money that we would save in terms of our public health system like Medicare and Medicaid. If people weren't obese, if people didn't have heart disease and cancer and diabetes, like, there's savings to be had there by preventing it. And those savings are in the billions. But here's the thing. Do you think that the hospitals and medical providers actually want the government to pursue policies that prevent illness? No, they don't. Because if they did, their profit margins would go down. Their revenue would go down. What they have created is an industrial farming system and an industrial food system that makes you sick, that makes you fat, and culturally on the back end they're telling you you should be body positive, you should be fat positive, you shouldn't fat shame. And that is the biggest crock of shit. But it's what these people own everything. They own our media. As shareholders, they own most of our healthcare systems. Most of our healthcare apparatus is owned by them. Our pharmaceutical companies are owned by them as shareholders. Our media is owned by them as shareholders. And what they have for us is an attitude that we are, quote-unquote, useless eaters who should be thinned out and exterminated. That's what we're dealing with here. That's the attitude that these people have to us. And so when we tie that back to the political system, we see that, under 3% of the population is funding these campaign donations in their entirety. In 2024 alone, we saw that they spent over $10.3 billion. And what do you think they expect for their investment? They expect a further entrenchment and advancement of these policies that are killing us. They expect a further entrenchment and advancement of budgetary policies where they are profiting on the back end through government spending, because the U.S. government at all levels is the biggest consumer in our economy. They're the ones, their contracts can make or break companies. And so the shareholders, the shareholder class, as I call them, the people who own about 90% or more of the publicly traded corporations in this country, for them the stock market is a barometer of their well-being and their health. And for the rest of us, the stock market has no bearing whatsoever on how we're doing financially. There's maybe 10% of the population that owns the majority of the stocks and the bonds in this country. And so the stock and bond market returns accurately reflect their health, their economic well-being. But for the rest of us, it has no bearing on anything. That's why when we see people talking about the Dow breaking records or the NASDAQ popping through, we don't see any improvement in our lives, in our day-to-day existence, because it's not reflective of our economic health. And in the meantime, we're being loaded up with debt that is issued in the full faith and credit of the United States. That means you and me. That $40 trillion, when it comes due, it's already over $1 trillion a year in interest payments. It's about a quarter of our federal budget in interest payments. And they just keep spending and spending and spending. And it's not because they're just fiscally reckless. It's because they intend to wreck this country. It's because they intend to break this country. What you have to understand is very few politicians get into politics out of a good faith desire to help others or to make this country succeed. They get into this system because they are motivated by ideological concerns rather than practical concerns. And it's like in the 80s, there was a man named Grover Norquist, famous Republican activist, and he said he wanted to shrink the government down to where he could drown it in a bathtub. And the way that he was going to do it was by ladling debt, by indebting the government, by deficit spending. Eventually, he believed that he would be able to force the hand of the government in terms of reducing spending, because they wouldn't be able to spend anymore. And the problem with that view is that the government prints money through the Federal Reserve. And as a result, Grover Norquist, his strategy clearly didn't work. The government grew and grew and grew. It's still growing. It will always grow. And it has evolved its own interest separate from that of regular people. And that's why the debt is $40 trillion. If you think that $40 trillion in debt went to services that benefited people, no. What it went to was programs that ostensibly we all have heard about. We've all heard about studies of lesbian obesity. We've heard about turtle tunnels. We've heard about deer tunnels. All this absurd shit that we hear about every year. And people like Rand Paul, they issue like their list of grievances, jokingly talking about Festivus. And one of the grievances is all this absurd federal spending on a line item level, but nothing changes. And if you think that money is going towards those absurd line items, I got some lakefront property in the Everglades to sell you. It's not going to turtle tunnels or studying lesbian obesity. It's going to line the pockets of the academics who take a bribe to engage in this. But then it goes out the back door and back to people who are politically connected, either family members of these politicians or associates of these politicians, campaign donors to these politicians. It's going to them. And it's been that way for as long as I've been alive. The entire federal budget is a money laundering operation to enrich people who help politicians get elected through their campaign donations and people who are related to those politicians. And those politicians are bought and sold. And the reason so many of them are opposed to the Epstein files release, the reason so many of them went along with it is because their donors are going to be implicated. If those files ever see the light of day, you're going to find out how many rich Americans like to fuck kids. That's the reality. And you're going to find out that these honeypot operations using children as sexual bait are conducted by our intelligence service and foreign intelligence services. They use children to compromise people in the shareholder class. And they use those children as chattel. And those children grow up to be broken adults. We've all seen those women come forward and talk about what they underwent with Jeffrey Epstein. And that's a small portion of it. There are dozens of other little operations like that in effect at all levels of government and at all levels of society. Compromat is the goal. It always has been. And the reason is because there's trillions of dollars at stake. And so if a government contractor can be compromised or they can compromise a politician, they're going to get what they want in terms of appropriations, in terms of government spending. And it'll be entered into a budget as things like a turtle tunnel or studying lesbian obesity. Why are lesbians fat? I don't know. Maybe because they eat too much as a demographic. Perhaps that's why. It doesn't take a multi-million-dollar government study to determine that. Why does anyone get fat? They get fat because they eat more than they're going to expend or burn off in terms of calories. You don't need $1 million government study to do that. And if you think that the government is just that incompetent and that stupid, I got news for you. It isn't. Everything they're doing is deliberate. It's not that they don't know where the money's going. They know exactly where the money's going because they're getting their cut on the back end. And their donors are getting their cut on the back end. But it's under the spurious line item nonsense that, it's a Medicaid program, it's a Medicare program, it's national defense, it's an omnibus spending bill line item for academia. It's like, no, all of that money is being skimmed. And nothing's going to be said about it because a lot of your politicians have been recorded having sex with kids. A lot of your politicians' shareholders or your politicians' campaign donors have been recorded having sex with kids. Their entry into this is to look the other way when government corruption occurs, to look the other way when fraud occurs. And it's only when some kid with a video camera, some local Republicans tip him off, and he goes to a daycare center that's not open at 2 p.m., doesn't have any kids in it, and he points his camera in that direction, this comes to light, and guess what? The federal government jumps into action. You start seeing ICE agents on the ground in Minnesota because they've got to perform. They've got to make you think that they're actually going to do something about the problem. Tim Walz, he lost his re-election bid, but he'll have a soft landing somewhere. He'll still be a millionaire. He'll still live in a big fancy house. He will never see a day of jail for his role in this. He'll never see a day in prison. He'll never be prosecuted. And even if he is, it'll be like the Somalis who were convicted in that case by a jury of their peers, the judge will overturn the jury's verdict and issue a judgment of acquittal. That's the American way. It is corrupt at all levels. And who do I blame for this? Us. But more specifically, self-hating white liberal women who are ashamed of being white, as though they're automatically culpable or guilty of all social ills. And they've been conditioned to think that way for decades, and it's finally starting to bear fruit. You start to see this Renee Good figure, this individual. She got shot by an ICE agent.
Lesbian.
There you go. She's a white lesbian obstructing federal agents as they do their jobs. And she's kind of a poster child for it. Her little lesbian wife was standing there antagonizing like ICE agents and federal agents doing their job. And they're holding their cameras up, recording them. And ultimately what was recorded was she aimed her truck at a federal agent and he shot her. And she died. She leaves behind 3 kids. And honestly, those 3 kids are probably better off without a mom who's going to try to transition them socially and surgically later on in life so that she can have a trophy kid who's trans. You're going to mutilate their genitals, give them hormones. That's the sad truth. Like, white liberal women are overwhelmingly mentally ill. Lesbians, overwhelmingly abused by men. That's the reason they're lesbians in the first place, and then they become lesbians, and that community has one of the highest domestic violence rates in the country. In the world, really. And the thing I want to make I can rant about this all day, but the point I want to make to you is that until we change ourselves, none of this is going to change. Until we take a long, hard look in the mirror, spiritually, at our own spiritual status, and we sublimate that into changing our own lives, and we start having a more realistic expectation of what government can be and what it can do, we're not going to fix any of our problems. Until we start identifying people as they are. Like, at the end of the day, we all knew what Trump was. We all knew what Obama was. We all knew what Bush was. We all knew what Clinton was. We all knew that these were terrible people. And yet they still got elected. So let's unpack Bill Clinton. There wasn't a person in 1992 when he first got elected who wasn't aware of his proclivity for strippers and adultery, and that's indicative of bad character on his part. And what did he do when he got in the White House? Did he run the country, handle its business? No, he got a blowjob from an intern. And he did it in the Oval Office. And that's what we know he did. And that intern and her friend, Linda Tripp, saved a blue dress with his semen on it. Like, who does that? Who saves a dress with jizz on it? Like, all of these people are trash individuals. Like, it's that simple. They are just absolute trash. None of them deserve our sympathy. Monica Lewinsky was a consenting adult who knew what she was doing. She knew he was married. She still performed fellatio and God knows what else for him. And we all knew that he was a philandering, two-timing adulterer as the governor and the attorney general of Arkansas. We knew. And yet a plurality of people voted for him in this country. And it's not like they didn't have a choice. They had George H.W. Bush. They had Ross Perot. They could have had anybody else that they wanted. But they chose him. They chose him twice. In his second election, he was running against Bob Dole, the Republican nominee, and Bob Dole is much more charming on late-night television than he is on the campaign trail. Talks about himself in third person, is socially awkward, tries to lodge a pen in his little crippled hand. That's an injury that he sustained defending this country in World War II. But he felt like he should have a pen or a pencil in it. It looked awkward. It looked terrible. And he didn't perform his best in debates against Bill Clinton. But you know what? He didn't run around on his wife, Libby Doll. He had far better character than Bill Clinton. He still lost that election. And in 2000, George W. Bush, who was born on third base and thought he hit a triple, who was a governor in a state where the governor is largely a ceremonial office. He was the governor of Texas. He ascended his way into that. And ultimately, he really didn't do anything in Texas. The lieutenant governor in the Texas House of Representatives, Texas Senate, does the heavy lifting. He just gives it the imprimatur of legitimacy in terms of like signing legislation and a law. He can veto legislation. But over the course of his time in office, over his tenure as governor, he really didn't do anything. Texas State Senate, Texas State House, Texas Lieutenant Governor, they're the ones that do everything in the state of Texas. So it was tailor-made for him because he really didn't have to do anything except be a primogeniture of a prominent political family, the Bush family. So he runs against Al Gore. And what do we know about Al Gore? Al Gore settled a lawsuit involving a sexual assault or rape accusation against him by a masseuse. Now, Bill Clinton was on that Epstein Express or that Lolita Express with Jeffrey Epstein 28 times. If you think that Bill Clinton, over those 28 flights, didn't compromise himself, was able to resist the allure of young women, young models, he exercised discipline that he previously had never exercised, you're out of your mind. There's a reason why Jeffrey Epstein had a portrait of Bill Clinton lounging around in that blue dress. Because he had contempt for him. He had contempt for who he was and how easily he could be seduced into this type of behavior. That's the reality of it. And ultimately, when you look at Al Gore having a sexual assault claim against him, and he raped a masseuse, a claim that he settled out of court, that speaks volumes. You have George W. Bush. His father purportedly had proclivities for young Hispanic boys in the Houston area from the 70s through the 80s. And if you read anything about the Franklin scandal, Franklin Community Credit Union in Nebraska, and Larry King, one of the allegations in that scandal was that a young black teenage boy was transported via private jets flying out of Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska to Chicago and elsewhere, where this boy was pimped out to George H.W. Bush, who had a proclivity for young black and brown boys, according to the backstory that you'd never heard of because the mainstream media buried it. Like, this is the unseen history of our politicians. Every single one of them sexually compromised. And then you got George W. Bush, who allegedly, according to Barry Seal, was part of a cocaine distribution deal in the 80s and was caught on tape. Barry Seal was later executed and murdered by hitmen who were affiliated with drug cartels. And the video that he supposedly had of his operation, which showed George W. Bush and Jeb Bush receiving a shipment of cocaine, disappeared. It just vanished into thin air. Gary Webb, a journalist in California who exposed the CIA's complicity in drug trafficking on behalf of the Contras in Nicaragua, he ended up committing suicide. And if you believe that he committed suicide, I believe he supposedly shot himself twice in the head. You know, we could go on and on and on about this. But the reality of it is George W. Bush was from a family that violated the laws of this country, the Bolton Amendments, in order to fund the Nicaraguan Contras. And one of the ways that they did that was by allowing cocaine to be trafficked into this country at multiple ports of entry. And they worked directly with Bill Clinton when he was governor of Arkansas. At Mena, Arkansas, you can Google all of this. You can look at the politics of heroin in Southeast Asia. That's an actual book. You can know that our government has been involved in drug trafficking to support its black ops operations in foreign countries for decades. Our government and criminal syndicates have worked together for decades to accomplish black ops objectives and missions. This is not controversial. This is well documented. You can look up the work of an author named Loretta Napoleoni, and you can see she maps out exactly how this works. Like, you can read Gary Webb's book. They traffic drugs into this country. They started the crack cocaine epidemic in this country. They consumed the entire population and entire demographics. And they are currently shipping drugs into this country, shipping children into this country. They are currently compromising individuals at all levels of society with this. They are working against the interest in the national security of this country. They're working against the basic health of this country. And the reason is because they hate you. They regard you as a useless eater. And so the chaos that you see at all levels of our country, the little bit of information that trickles out about fraud and corruption in places like Minnesota, that's nothing. That's even 1% of the issue. And they are slowly killing you, calling you off. They are slowly building the infrastructure to enslave you. And you're already enslaved. Look at how many of you are living paycheck to paycheck. Look at how many of you are being put into competition by your own government for wage stability and for a living, because your government tacitly allows or outright allows illegal aliens to come in here and undercut you as your competition. They're in competition with you for jobs. They're willing to work at a lower wage than you can afford to work for, and they can afford to work for it because your government is handing them your tax dollars in the form of debit cards that are loaded with thousands of dollars in cash. They're funding their food. They're funding their medical care. It's not racist to say it. It's a fact. It's actually happening. And it's not white replacement theory that I'm talking about. It's American replacement theory. That is, if you are below the 10%, they regard you as a useless eater, as a burden on society, and they want you eating processed foods and working 2 jobs and not investing time in your family. They want you divorced. They want you fat. They want you sick because they hate you. And it doesn't matter if you're white, doesn't matter if you're black, doesn't matter if you're Asian. If you're not part of their economic strata, if you're not cheating the system and defrauding the system and making millions in the process, and that's how a lot of people in this country have gotten where they've gotten. They got there through government outlays and government expenditures. Who do you think these shareholders, these defense contractors are getting their money from? They're getting it from government spending. Where do you think these shareholders, the banks that manage our entitlements programs, such as SNAP and TANF and WIC, where do you think that they're getting their money from? They're getting it from the stock dividends that they reap when companies like Raytheon and JP Morgan Chase manage welfare programs. Look it up. I'm not lying about it. Where do you think shareholders of corporations like Walmart who get tax abatements where they don't have to pay property taxes and they get to recoup their sales tax revenues, they get to hold on to that in order to fund their supercenter construction costs. They get those concessions and those abatements from local governments who are undercutting actual tax-paying businesses in their jurisdiction. And the justification is Walmart creates jobs. Well, Walmart also creates welfare recipients. And we are subsidizing Walmart's labor cost to the tune of at least $4 billion a year. This is a company that makes $12 billion in profit. They can afford to pay their people a wage that puts them above poverty level. But we're subsidizing their labor costs. Every retailer you step foot into, their employees are receiving Section 8. Their employees are receiving Medicaid. Their employees are receiving EBT benefits. It is fraudulent in the extreme. You are asked to subsidize their labor costs through your tax dollars. And these are profitable companies. But their shareholders want to be even more profitable than they would be just on their business. So what they do is they buy and sell politicians through these political donations. And those politicians fraudulently put line items in budgetary legislation and whatnot, spending bills that obscure where the money is actually going. They tell you it's going to things like, studying lesbian weight loss or turtle tunnels or studies on, queer theory, all of this stuff that is obviously fraudulent on its face. That money is not actually going towards it. A little bit of it goes towards it. The rest of it gets funneled out the back door to the political interest and people who are affiliated with these politicians. It is absolutely laundering, period. And it occurs on such a scale that it makes prosecution and enforcement impossible. And so as I sit here and I say to you, ultimately this is a values-based proposition. Most of us won't engage in this kind of behavior because our values stop us from engaging in this kind of behavior. We believe in God. We believe in consequences, eternal consequences. And we ultimately say to ourselves that this is inappropriate, this is wrong. And as a result, we don't engage in this kind of dishonesty. We don't try to defraud people. But we elect politicians because the politicians that we have a choice of, they're all complicit in it. When I say to you that I've never looked at a single politician in opposition research that wasn't compromised sexually or financially or both ways, I mean it. None of them are good people. Now, they have their limits. You see Marjorie Taylor Greene and whatnot. She had her limits. Her wake-up call was the Epstein files and the president's reaction to it. That his friends were going to be hurt by the release of those files. And as I said earlier in this podcast, if your friends are fucking children, they deserve to be hurt. They deserve to suffer. They deserve to be prosecuted. They deserve to be ruined. It's that simple. And we're not here. I'm not here to mince words about it. Whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat or a centrist, if you have sex with children, you should be executed. It's that simple. If you defraud the U.S. government through the misuse of COVID funds, through bailouts, so on and so forth, you're a traitor to this country. If you contributed in any way to the defrauding of this country to the tune of $40 trillion, and that's what our national debt is, a lot of it is fraud. A lot of it is the stuff you see in Somalia. A lot of this is what you see in Pentagon audits, which they can't pass. They can't account for trillions of dollars in spending. They know where that money went. They're not going to tell you. They're not going to be forthcoming with the auditors. Like when Elon Musk came in, and there was no pre-authorization for government outlays, and he and his team of nerds came in to these federal agencies. Do you really think people were up in arms over the constitutionality or the legality of what Doge was doing? No, they were up in arms because their gravy train was coming to an end. USAID or USAID has been shut down effectively. The Department of Education, another horrible laundering operation, shut down effectively. And the issue that the people who are in opposition to this have is that the vehicles by which they are plundering this country and plundering tax dollars, those things have disappeared for them. They're not able to effectively launder money to themselves and to the people who donate to them. That has been impeded somewhat. It hasn't been completely abolished, but it has been impeded, and they've been made uncomfortable by it. And so they raised hell while it was going on. It's still an ongoing issue. Like, the reality of it is the return on investment for those political donations is that they take tax dollars and they route it for inappropriate or illegal purposes to these campaign donors. A lot of what's going on in our country in terms of like government spending is illegitimate. It does not benefit people. It benefits a select group of people who are politically connected. People who are also willing to pass that money through their illegitimate businesses and business fronts to politicians and their campaign donors who are largely in the shareholder class and who are largely the type of people who are going to show up in that Epstein list if it's ever released. And what you see is they control not only the elected bureaucracy, but the appointed bureaucracy and the permanent bureaucracy, because 1% of those files have been released. And that 1% of files have been so heavily redacted that you can barely see a full picture of what's going on. But the picture that you do see is damning. The picture that you do see of these people, like Jeffrey Epstein with children in his lap and whatnot, given his history. And they're on a private airplane, an airplane that is supposedly the site of orgies and sexual abuse on a regular basis. The Lolita Express. You're seeing him with children in his lap on that plane. And it makes a little bit more sense when your president comes out and says, I'm not a Christian. I'm not going to heaven. He turns around later and he tries to lessen the impact of that statement by saying that he was joking about not going to heaven. But the values of Donald Trump are clear. And they're more in line with the people on that Epstein list than they are with average folks who say, look, I can't be seen associating with somebody like this. I can't have any affiliation with them. If you think that your values and those values of Bill Gates and other people in his orbit are similar at all, they're not. They don't believe what you and I believe. And they think that we're suckers for believing that, kids shouldn't be submitted to sexual abuse. And here's another thing you don't know about Bill Gates. One of his employees at his home, a guy who handled his computer system at his home, his private residence, was arrested for possession of child pornography. If you go down the list of celebrities that we know were either on the Lolita Express or visited Epstein Island, Little St. James, all of them have sexual abuse or sexual harassment allegations against them. Tom Hanks supposedly purchased a child from her father. That woman has been screaming into the internet for years about how Tom Hanks abused her. And nothing's been done about it. Nothing. And nothing will be done about it. Like the stories of Digital Entertainment Network, you can look that up as well. Digital Entertainment Network, DEN. The sexual abuse that occurred there and the people who are involved, like Bryan Singer and others, who repeatedly show up in these types of allegations. Not one of them is prosecuted. Now, our government can fly to Venezuela in the dead of night and kidnap and arrest the leader of a country. But it can't do anything about the Epstein client list. It can't do anything about the rampant corruption that came to light in Minnesota, that was brought to light by some little Mormon kid. You're telling me the government doesn't know what's going on here? Let me tell you something. When I deposit a check of 10 grand or 20 grand or whatnot from my work as an investigative researcher, very often that check has a hold on it for 10 to 14 days because it generates a treasury report because it's in excess of a certain amount. And they've got to make sure that that money is legitimately being paid to me. And so they flag it. These people managed to defraud the government of a reported $9 billion. They managed to get it into the bank without a problem. They managed to get it out of the country and back to Somalia without a problem. We're operating by two different sets of rules here. At the end of the day, that's what we're dealing with. Is two different sets of rules. These Somalis were connected to the political establishment in Minnesota. Part of the money that lined their pockets also lined the pockets of politicians in Minnesota through campaign donations and through expenditures to companies that were affiliated with these politicians. I did a project years ago on Republican 501c3s, 501c4s, and PACs, various types of PACs. And if you go down their disclosures on their Form 990s, and you see all of the companies that they've spent a reportable amount with, and you go look up the corporate registrations of those companies, you will find that all of those companies are owned by and operated by officers of that nonprofit. It's double dipping. So they collect a salary on the front end, and their company is the one that supposedly does all of the work for the nonprofit. So they get paid twice. And those of you who are stupid enough to respond to those fundraising emails for those nonprofits who don't do any due diligence and don't realize that they are siphoning off your money, not for a cause, not for a purpose, not to change things, not for activism, but for their own personal gain. You're the problem. Because you think you can throw money at a problem through these groups and get somewhere, and most of these groups are just siphoning money off of you. They don't care about a cause. Their cause is money. A lot of your nonprofits consume 80-90% of every dollar that you donate for overhead. And a lot of that overhead goes to fundraising materials like direct mail issued by companies that either give them a cutback of the funds spent, or those fundraising companies and operations are owned and operated by officers of that nonprofit, and they collect on the back end as well. They get paid on the front end as a salaried officer or employee of that nonprofit, and they get paid on the back end as an officer or employee of that LLC, that corporation that's doing their fundraising. It is absolutely corrupt. But it is also emblematic of everything that you see in the news when it comes to government programs and fraud. They have the same attitude. They have the same value system. And that is that the U.S. taxpayers are suckers who are too busy busting their ass to make a living to do any due diligence on what's actually going on with their government. And the little bit that trickles out is bad enough. This Nick Shirley kid, what he found in Minnesota, that's bad enough. But the reality of it is, like, it's not going to get better. If voting changed anything, they make it illegal. At most, 60% of people vote in federal elections. In off-year elections, that number drops down in like the teens or the 20s. So your local and your state elections, the reason these people succeed, keep getting in office, is because most of you have realized that your vote doesn't count. And you dropped out of the system. Like, as I said, if voting changed anything, they make it illegal. What I also said earlier in this podcast, there's nothing that 546 well-paced shots can't fix at the federal level. And ultimately, this is not an issue of ideology. This is an issue of practicality. You realize if you're out there trying to buy a home, if you're out there trying to sell a home, that your government is killing you. If you're out here trying to get a job, an actual job that pays well, you are being put in competition, not just with legal labor, people who are here illegally. You're being put in competition with foreign labor in China and in India. And sometimes if you're highly qualified, you have a STEM degree, you're put in competition with foreign labor that's imported here over an H-1B visa. And that's your government that's doing that. That's your government that's undercutting you. That's your government that's supposed to represent you that's not doing its job. Like, that's what you're faced with. Your own government is betraying your interest. It's undermining your country. It's saddling your country with $40 trillion worth of debt, most of which was embezzled to political interest. And now the government under Donald Trump ostensibly is trying to enforce the law, but what they're really doing is building the infrastructure for totalitarian autocratic society through companies like Palantir. You already have a social credit profile. Everybody watching this, all your social media posts, all your spending, all of it is being hoovered up by these data collection companies and weaponized against you by companies like Palantir. If you think the sudden explosion of free speech when it comes to anti-Semitism, things that previously would have gotten you suspended on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram that are going free, if you think that that's accidental, it's not. All of us have profiles built around that data. We felt a little free. We felt like we could speak freely in the Trump era on social media. I'm telling you that in the next 2 to 4 to 6 years, that information, that freedom of speech that you exercise is constitutionally protected. It will be weaponized against you by private corporations like Palantir. It'll be part of a profile that any prospective employer can access. That's your reality. We are going to be China. And in China, people whose social credit scores drop below a certain level, they have to sleep on the street. Their access to banking is suspended. Their access to employment opportunities is suspended. That's the future these people want. That's the future that their donors want. They want you enslaved. They hope, ultimately, to cull the population through public health crises. And what you're seeing here is they're making it economically impossible for you to live by depressing your wages, by putting you in competition with foreign workers abroad in China and India. They're also importing illegals here to compete with you, all the while raising your cost of living through inflation. And they're making it impossible for you to access health care, impossible for you to afford health care. So you can access health care all you want, but you're going to go bankrupt if you get sick. Like that's the reality. Most of us are going to go bankrupt. Most of us don't have savings because we don't make enough to afford the cost of living. Like, our police are focused on revenue positive offenses and infractions like traffic tickets because they make money on it. Are they focused on closing homicide cases and property theft and sexual assault cases? No, they're not. About 49% of homicides in this country are closed by an arrest or a conviction. Arrest or conviction. That means that even if they don't convict the person of the homicide for which they've been arrested, they still count it as a closed case. So the actual conviction rate is much lower than 49%, which means that you, if you murder somebody, you got a better 1 in 2 chance of getting away with it in this country. When it comes to sexual assaults, conviction rate is in the mid to low 20s, depending on the crime, the type of sexual assault. So if you rape somebody, or you sexually abuse somebody, you got a better than 7 in 10 chance of getting away with it. It's the same thing with property crimes. So I ask you, what are we paying for? We have $40 trillion in debt as a country. That's just at the federal level. That doesn't count all the debt at the state and local level. What are we getting for all of this money that we pay in tax? What are we getting? Are we getting an effective law enforcement apparatus that actually does its job and keeps us safe by closing cases and prosecuting offenders? No, we're not getting that at all. We're not getting that at all. I know rape victims in the state where I live whose cases were brought 9-10 years ago. 9-10 years ago, they still haven't gone to trial. Criminal information was filed a decade ago, and the case has still not gone to trial. I know multiple victims in that situation. And you want to tell me that we should be paying more for this? Our government doesn't work for us. I think that should be apparent to anybody watching this. And it doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. On an ideological level, these people actively seek to sabotage their government and break it down by not enforcing laws, or selectively enforcing laws. They are corrupt. They know exactly where that money has gone. They just plead ignorance of it because some of that money has gone back to them. Some of that money has gone into their pockets and the pockets of people who donated to their campaigns. And then they act like $9 billion in fraud happened overnight, and they didn't know what was going on right under their noses in Minnesota and elsewhere. Every year, the Pentagon, the Department of War, admits that it doesn't know what multiple trillions of dollars have been spent on, where it went, where it was allocated. And they say it's because of their inventory systems and this and the other. They know what they're spending on. Somebody in the Department of War knows where that money went because they were the ones who spent it. They were the ones who sent it. And yet nobody's getting to the bottom of it. Like, at the end of the day, this is a values-based proposition. People who have strong values understand that they're accountable to God. They understand that none of this is okay, and they don't do it. They don't steal money that isn't theirs, money that is given up for the public interest through taxes. They don't steal that money, do they? No. Normal people don't do this. Normal people don't make these kinds of unethical and moral decisions. They're not trying to hose people. But people in government and people who donate to put others in government through campaign donations, they lie, cheat, and steal all day, every day. And the reason we don't have this Epstein list is because it extends beyond just mere fraud. It extends to thinking they're above the law and are beyond the law's reach when it comes to sexually abusing adults and children. And why wouldn't they think that? Look at what's going on. Look at what's happening. Look at what's being done. Look at a president who explicitly disavows being Christian, who hems and haws about whether or not he's going to heaven, which, you know, if you are a Christian, you believe that Christ is the only way to heaven. And so having a president who explicitly disavows Christ, says he's not a Christian, says he's not going to heaven, and then later retracts it and says, I was joking, when he's interviewed by Laura Ingraham. A lesbian who ironically believes that even though she's engaged in behavior that's classified as an abomination in the scriptures, she believes that she's going to heaven. Like, that's the absurdity of this. That's where we're at as a country. That man's in photograph after photograph with Jeffrey Epstein. He's in photograph after photograph with others like Bill Clinton. He's friends with Bill Clinton. He was friends with Bill Clinton. Shut his golf course down so that Clinton could have unfettered access to it on his birthday. And you want to tell me that he wasn't part of what Clinton was part of? He wasn't participating in the behavior that we know that Epstein was participating in, even though he was on that jet and he was partying with Epstein at Mar-a-Lago. They had girls imported in for a bikini contest where Epstein and Trump were the sole men present. And you're going to tell me that they weren't engaged in some sort of sexual impropriety with those girls? That Trump wasn't engaged in sexual impropriety when he went backstage to Miss Teen USA and saw a bunch of teenage girls in various states of undress? You're going to tell me that man shares my values in any way, shape, fashion, form? I got kids. Donald Trump needs his ass whooped. You know, I got a daughter. I got a stepson. Any adult that aspires to abuse them or their peers is somebody I don't bear witness with. And when that adult explicitly disavows being a Christian, more power to him. At least you're being honest. We all know what's up in those Epstein files. We all know why they're being redacted. We all know why they're being slow-walked. And it's because even if Trump isn't accused of impropriety in those files, which he is accused of impropriety in some of them, but even if you don't believe that he's guilty of that impropriety, that he's guilty of illegal conduct with Katie, the girl who accused him of raping her when she was 13, and had an eyewitness to it, even if you don't believe that, when you see the people that Trump affiliated with, the people that he called his friends, there's no excuse for any of this. I don't have friends who minimize sexual assault. I don't have friends who are around teenage girls at beauty pageants, or who aspire to be around teenage girls, or who comment on the attractiveness of teenage girls. I don't have friends like that. And the reason is because I'm a man. And I'm a Christian. And real men don't do any of this. Real Christians don't do any of this shit. But I understand his disavowal of Christianity to some degree. Because honestly, it's a label that stands for everything and nothing at the same time. A lot of Christians, or professing Christians, have engaged in exactly the same type of behavior that Donald Trump is engaged in. They cheat on their wives. They cheat on their girlfriends. They have sex outside of wedlock. They watch pornography. Like, all of this comes down to values. It comes down to whether or not you believe what the Bible says about your body being a temple of God. And every sin, aside from adultery, fornication, is committed outside of the body. But sexual sin is committed inside of the body and has a direct bearing on the temple of God. Donald Trump doesn't have that value. Most professing Christians don't have that value system. And so as a result, they're flocking to Donald Trump to defend him in this Epstein episode. They defend everything that he does. They excuse everything that he's done. He's cheated on all of his wives. He paid a porn star to keep quiet. He's paid for at least one abortion that we know of. Like, he paid for the murder of a child. And I'm expected to line up behind him because he says right-wing things or because he espouses right-wing policies. No, absolutely. I don't bear witness with that man in any way, shape, fashion, or form because of the aforementioned issues. Like, if you think that he believes that any of that is wrong or that he's never disavowed what he did to his first two wives. His first wife accused him in the divorce proceedings of sexually assaulting her. Like, that's a reality. Now, you could say it's in the heat of divorce and the proceedings. She later, settled and whatnot. He was never prosecuted or convicted, but he was sued by E.G. and Carroll. He has dozens of women who allege sexual impropriety and sexual assault on his part. And he's on a recorded, he's recorded saying sometimes he grabs women by the pussy, and when you're a star, they let you. Like, that right there, the fact that he said that is disqualifying in my mind. I don't like that man. But I also didn't like his competitor, Hillary Clinton. She has enabled her husband at every turn. Her husband has multiple allegations of sexual abuse and assault. Look up Kathleen Willey. Look up Juanita Broderick. Look up just Google allegations against Bill Clinton for sexual assault. He's on that Lolita Express 28 times. He's an accused rapist. I believe Juanita Broderick. 100%. And if he raped her, there's no doubt in my mind that he'd rape another woman. Especially given that he got away with it. So when I look at the sum total of this, the only reason Trump's ICE agents are in Minnesota is because after Nick Shirley posted those videos, there was no way to avoid having to confront this issue in Minnesota. And it was politically beneficial to him because it got rid of Tim Walz. It embarrassed Democrats. And they should be embarrassed. They don't have any capacity for shame. If they did, they never would have done this in the first place. But this is what corruption at all levels reeks. And it comes back to your values. If you don't believe in eternal consequences, you're going to do whatever. You're going to rape kids. You're going to defraud your fellow citizens. You're going to do any number of things that are an abomination to God and man. And then on top of it, when you're confronted, you're going to talk about identity and resentment politics, grievance-based politics. Oh, it's racist. You just hate Somalis. I don't hate anybody for being who they are. God does not make mistakes. If He made you Somalian, He had a reason for doing so. If He made you black, He had a reason for doing so. I do not wake up every day, look at my white skin, and think that I'm better than anybody else because of my skin color, or because I'm lumped into this monolithic white demographic. I don't think that at all. I don't think I'm better than anybody, even though I live a life where I work and I pay my bills and I treat my wife with respect. I go to work and I go home. I don't do anything in between. I don't look at that shit on the internet, that pornography. Not only that, I won't look at the stuff that's just short of pornography. It's being marketed. Like, you can, if you're on social media at all, and you have your reels set to what you like and don't like. And for me, that's like meat and cars and guns and animals. Eventually, that platform is going to sneak in some sexual material, and you'll have to scroll past it. But they do it to tempt you. They do it to undermine you. And only values centered in Christ and God are going to immunize you from that appeal. They want you to be a pervert. They want you to have OnlyFans subscriptions. They want you to be looking at adult women and underage girls on these sites. Sean Ryan did a show recently where he talked about a teenage OnlyFans. And ultimately, I want to look that up real quickly. I'm sure I'll get flagged. So, he had a hacker on there who talked about OnlyFans for teens. And Sean Ryan's mind was clearly blown. Like, you could see his skull peel back when he heard about it. He said, I had no idea this shit existed. And the name of the site is Brand Army, and it's explicitly aimed at children. That is, under 18. It's a gateway to OnlyFans. It's sexualizing children. And it's subscription-based. It's called Brand Army. I've never gone to that site. I never will, even to like an investigative sense. I'll take Sean Ryan's word for it and this hacker that he had on his show's word for it, that Brand Army is a site that monetizes the sexualization of teenage girls and boys. And ultimately what you see are these 18-year-olds, as soon as they turn 18, they get an OnlyFans, and they make millions. Like, so there was one recently in the news, and I want to look her up. So in 24 hours, this girl named Piper Raquel, who I'd never heard of. I don't watch a lot of TV. Certainly don't watch a lot of, kid-oriented entertainment, because I'm not a child. I'm 48. She joined OnlyFans right after she turned 18. And in the first 24 hours, she made over $3 million. That's the level of perversion that's common in our society. There's $3 million to see this 18-year-old who apparently was some sort of a child YouTube personality. She had a channel on YouTube. She made $3 million in 24 hours selling her sexuality on OnlyFans. That's the level we've reached as a society. As soon as this girl turned 18, she was a millionaire because perverts who had undoubtedly watched her as a child, masturbated to her, sexually fantasized about her as a child. As soon as she got an OnlyFans, they jumped on it and subscribed to her site to the tune of $3 million. She netted $2.3 million from what I'm seeing on Google. That was her portion of it. She's 18. And so it's legal, but is it right? Hell no. None of this shit is right. And if you want to see where it's headed, I mean, there was a case in Germany where a woman, in order to receive unemployment benefits, she had to consider entertainment. She had to consider being a brothel employee. That is, if she wanted to receive benefits, she had to consider the available job in a legal sex industry. So there was a 25-year-old German woman who said she would not take a job in a whorehouse, and she was facing a cut in her employment benefits. Like, here in America, they don't have to go on welfare. They don't have to be directed by the government. Any young girl who sees a Piper Raquel making $2.3 million in 24 hours, first off, they're going to go on YouTube and try to be an influencer. And second, they can go to Brand Army and sell their sexuality as a teenager. Because Brand Army is the teenage version of OnlyFans. And then when they turn 18, if they built an audience and a following of adult perverts, they can sign up for OnlyFans. And they can theoretically make more money on OnlyFans than they make at any legal job. That's the culture that we have created. And don't tell me that there aren't some of you out there watching this who don't watch pornography, because it is an industry in the tens of billions worldwide. And some of you profess Christ and you go on OnlyFans, you go on any number of these free sites, all operated by this one conglomerate called MindGeek. You know them as a parent company of Pornhub. And Pornhub said that it couldn't clean up its act until Bill Ackerman and others enlisted the government to go after Pornhub for hosting underage sex material, child sexual abuse material on its website. Pornhub wanted to play like they couldn't identify that material and delete that material. And until their credit card processing was at risk, that is, their ability to receive payments through Visa and other credit card processors, when that was at risk, they decided they could clean up their act and verify their content. And that is, you have to undergo age verification as a Pornhub creator. So I think that's what they call it. And so if you're out there creating your own pornography and posting it on Pornhub, now you have to verify your identity and your age. Now, that helped clean up the child sexual abuse material on Pornhub, they started deleting unverified accounts. But at the end of the day, and their initial impulse was to refuse to delete that material off of their website. On OnlyFans, they make you verify it, but as soon as you turn 18, you can do it. And if you're not 18, you go to a site like Brand Army, which is OnlyFans for teenagers. That's the reality of it. That's the culture in which we live. And most of us are too overwhelmed to foment any kind of effective action against it, because the fraud, the corruption is so pervasive and so ubiquitous that we just feel like, hey, we can't deal with it. Our government can't deal with it. But your government is the one that put it into place. And the people who own your government, the campaign donors, they're the ones enabling this cultural rot because they own the media outlets. They're the ones bombarding your children with sexual imagery. The average age of exposure in this country, of first exposure to pornography, is down to 10 years of age. And that's just pornography. It doesn't count all the sexual imagery that's in television, in movies that aren't considered pornographic. Like, we are losing our identity as a people. And this Renee Good woman, she's ashamed of being white. She was ashamed of who she was. That's why she was out there. She was trying to compensate for being white. And what do you call it? Privileged. And now her children don't have a mother. But even if they had a mother, like, would they be better off? Because it's a mentally ill, liberal, white woman who's a lesbian. That's her mother. And she's raising her children in a household with another lesbian. Like, at the end of the day, those children are being exposed to deviant behavior that's being normalized and modeled for them. They think it's okay to have a same-sex spouse. They think it's because guess what? They got two moms. And you see it over and over again in the headlines, these gay men who are adopting children and getting arrested for sexually abusing them. Like, that's what happens when you normalize deviancy. When you say that two men and two women in marriage are the same thing or the equivalent of an opposite-sex couple. And for that matter, when you say that any opposite-sex couple should be able to get married and should be able to engage in whatever lifestyle they want, this polyamory nonsense, the kids have a front row seat to that, and it's normalized for them. Marriage is a covenant between a man, a woman, and God. That's legitimate marriage. It's not a piece of paper that the state issues you. The idea that we have marriage licenses is a joke. I need a license to get married. And they say it's for public health reasons, to prevent incest and so on and so forth. But the reality of it is the state strips God out of the equation. And the only way that marriage works is if a man and a woman have a common value system in God. That's the only way it works. Because the man understands that whatever he does to his wife is what he's doing to God. If he's disrespecting and undermining his wife, he's disrespecting and undermining God. And conversely, the woman understands the same. If she disrespects and undermines her husband, she's disrespecting and undermining God. Anybody who has any value system in Christ understands that every man, woman, and child on this planet is created in the image of God. And whatever you do to that person is what you're doing to God. So when you try to run a man over who's doing his job with your car, and you get shot, you did that to God.
God gave you your life so that you could be a mother to your children, so that you could be part of your family. There's no higher cause than that. There's no higher purpose than raising your children to be functioning adults who believe in God. And obviously, this woman, Renee Good, didn't believe in God, didn't follow God, didn't follow Christ, because the lifestyle choice that she made is classified as an abomination in Scripture. There's no two ways about that. And so as I sit here and I talk about these things, many of you watching this, and I say that, looks like I have 8 viewers so far. But part of you shirks at this, you shrink back at this, you recoil at what I just said. But it's the truth. The crisis we have in this country is a crisis of values. Our own president disavows Christ, says that he's not a Christian, but he implores Christians to get out and vote for him, which tells you everything you need to know about his view of Christians. Go out and vote for me, but I'm not one of you. I'll take your vote, but not your values. I'll take your vote, but not your beliefs. I'll take your vote, but not the way you live your lives. I want to have sex with porn stars. I want to pay for abortions. I want to live my life independently of those values and that belief system. I want to be my own God. That's effectively Donald Trump's pitch. Over the course of his life, he's done whatever he wanted without respect for any values, without respect for any of the women that he's married, any of the women that he's engaged in fornication with. He is evil. And those of you who don't want to face this, you want to believe that he's on your side. He's told you that he's not on your side. He told you he's not a Christian, that he's not going to heaven. He may have retracted that later in an interview with a lesbian, Laura Ingraham. But at the end of the day, he's not going to heaven. You know him by his works and his fruits. This is not a complicated issue. That man is not Christian by his own admission, and his life reflects that. He's not monogamous. He doesn't respect his wife, just like he didn't respect his wives before his current wife. He doesn't go to work and he doesn't go home. He doesn't see anything wrong with adultery. He doesn't see anything wrong with not paying his subcontractors on his developments. He has never had values that are consistent with the majority of Americans. And yet, he was elected because the other candidate put forth was worse than he was, and even less likable as a human being. And Hillary Clinton is as corrupt as they come, and I could go off on that, but she lost the election. She's irrelevant. Joe Biden didn't win in 2020, and Joe Biden, according to his daughter's diary, is an incestuous pedophile who sexually abused his daughter. His son, Hunter Biden, is a drug addict and just an absolute mess. Like, he's $50 million in debt. Has no idea how he's going to get out of it. His private photographs were leaked all over the internet. His private videos were leaked all over the internet where he's having sex with his dead brother's wife and making pornographic videos about it. He's smoking crack. He's with escorts, so on and so forth. Like, that's the level of parenting that Joe Biden did. 2 of his kids are addicts and mentally ill. The third died of brain cancer. appeared to be an upstanding individual on the surface. But we all saw what happened with Hunter Biden. We saw that he lied on a federal firearms application about his addiction in order to get a gun. He later instructed his girlfriend at the time in procuring the gun and whatnot. She apparently tried to throw the gun away in a receptacle, like a trash receptacle somewhere. He told her to go back and get it. Now, he's not supposed to have a firearm because of his addiction issues. Was he convicted of that? Was he convicted of, did he serve a day in prison for what he did? No. He didn't. He's never going to, did his dad serve a day in prison for raping his daughter? For having showers with her? God knows what else Joe Biden did. And God knows who else he abused. But at the end of the day, you know, like I sit here as a father and I say to you, Joe Biden needs his ass beat for what he did to his kids. Just like Donald Trump needs his ass beat. Like a lot of our leaders need their ass beat for this kind of behavior. And is it going to happen? No. Because Americans have an aversion to the idea of disposing of their government and moreover, doing the hard work and the heavy lifting to the 3 million people in this country who fund campaign donations and who do so because they expect a return on their investment in terms of policies and laws and government spending. Like, that's what we're up against, but none of us has the stomach to collectively organize, set aside our ideological differences and say, this is just beyond acceptable. It's beyond unacceptable. We don't want to do the work. We think, oh, we can vote them out. Well, I submit to you that every election in my lifetime has probably been rigged. I know 2020 was rigged. I have my questions about 2000. But even if you don't believe the count is rigged in terms of the electronic ballots and so on and so forth, which you can go on the internet and look at how those vote totals and tabulations can be flipped. If you don't believe that Smartmatic and others are engaged in corruption, even though there's ample documentation to indicate that they are engaged in corruption and election fraud, no matter how many people they've sued, such as Chuck Lindell and Rudy Giuliani, so on and so forth, and the stuff in Georgia, Rudy Giuliani was ultimately vindicated because they admitted that they had over 300,000 ballots that they improperly certified in an election that was determined by 11,000 votes. And Rudy Giuliani has, millions of dollars in judgments against him because of a corrupt legal system. I don't like Rudy Giuliani, but he was right about what happened in Georgia. And that judgment against him should be reversed and rescinded. He should be refunded all of his legal fees. And he's been effectively bankrupted. He's not the only one. Chuck Lindell, the CEO of MyPillow, effectively bankrupted and ruined for standing on this. Like Sidney Powell, effectively in the same boat. They bullied these people for having an opinion that the election was stolen, even though they had ample evidence to back up what they were saying. And even though the evidence that has emerged since indicates that there was something foul afoot in the 2020 election, and that Joe Biden was not a legitimate president. And when you look at the facts of Joe Biden's administration, the auto pen scandal, the fact that other people were signing presidential pardons and executive orders in his name, and he was too senile to do it himself. We all saw Joe Biden for 4 years. We saw that he was mentally unfit for office. And all those people who wanted to invoke the 25th Amendment against Trump, they were really quiet when it came to Joe Biden and his obvious senility. Because say what you will about Joe Biden, he had an insurance policy and his vice president. Nobody wanted Kamala Harris to be president and succeed him. She'd be more of a dumpster fire than he was. Like, at the end of the day, our government is unqualified from top to bottom. They're corrupt from top to bottom, and we need a reset. If we're ever going to confront our national debt issue, which is $40 trillion just at the federal level, that's the outright amount that our government owes to our creditors, $40 trillion. That doesn't count unfunded liabilities in terms of like the government's, what the government will owe over time to retirees from government service. It doesn't count any number of things like that. It certainly doesn't count the state and local debt, which is trillions more. And what we're faced with is a situation where if we don't fix this through the most drastic means necessary, we're going to have a real issue. Our children and grandchildren are going to have a real issue just surviving. Already you see it in inflation. You see it in the fact that the government is spending over $1 trillion a year just to service the debt. It could be worse, and it will be worse over time. You've seen America's credit rating reduced. You've seen a stock market that is unmoored, totally disconnected from regular people's lives. Everybody extols the stock market as a barometer of economic health, but for the average person on the street, the stock market has no relevance to their day-to-day life. That has to change. Like what I would say to the shareholder class is your time is numbered. And you did this to yourself. And it's not communist or socialist to say this. You are a corrupt class of plutocrats. And you've had your way for some time with this country and its people. But the reality of it is a lot of you were in those Epstein files. A lot of you. And you're in other files as well. Because you're deviants. You're sexual deviants. You're degenerates. You're corrupt. And you deserve whatever's coming your way. You don't have any values. Because if you did, you wouldn't be out here raping kids and stealing from the government and the taxpayers. You wouldn't be pitting your employees against Indian H-1B visa holders. You wouldn't be pitting your employees against foreign workers or illegal workers to depress their wages. The fact is that you have contempt for us. You don't consider yourself to be a citizen of these United States. You consider yourself to be a global citizen. That's your conceit. And you think that because you hold the capital, which you gained through corruption and government and through political connections, you think because you hold that capital that it's legitimately yours, even though you gained it through illegal means and corrupt means. Any of you who received a bailout in 2008, any of you who took those COVID funds and defrauded us, all of you are traitors. All of you deserve to die for what you have done to this country and what you have done to the standard of living in this country. You are traitors to the public interest. And what I would say to anybody watching this is you need to look at them as traitors. You need to realize they're nothing more than common thieves. They're good at it. They steal on a scale that is immeasurable. But they have corrupted this country at all levels, culturally, socially, financially, politically. They're the reason for the toxic discourse and the toxic atmosphere where you have these people that often are paid protesters going out in the streets and agitating against the enforcement of the law when it comes to immigration, when it comes to anything. And the people they hold up as victims aren't victims at all. George Floyd put a gun into a pregnant woman's belly. George Floyd should have gone to prison for life for that, for what he did down in Texas in a home invasion. George Floyd tried to pass off a counterfeit $20 bill to buy something in a store. And when he got called on it, the store clerk offered to pay out of his own pocket for what George wanted to buy. And George turned him down. He went outside. He was high. He sat in his vehicle and the police arrived. And rather than complying with the police, who were well within their rights to lawfully arrest him, George Floyd resisted arrest. What killed George Floyd was all the drugs in his system and a cardiac arrest. Derek Chauvin did not kill George Floyd. Derek Chauvin should not be in jail. Now, did those police do things that should have been done differently? Sure, they should have just handcuffed George Floyd, shackled his legs, and set him up on a sidewalk waiting for the EMTs to get there. But there was nothing unlawful about what they did to restrain somebody who was resisting arrest. And the fact that the left wing in this country lionizes George Floyd or anyone else who has a record of violence against others, who live their lives as a junkie, as a violent criminal, as someone who disrespected the laws and social norms and morals that are common to the majority of people in this country. Most of us would never stick a pistol in a pregnant woman's stomach. We wouldn't be part of a home invasion. Like, we wouldn't do that. As a result, we don't have any connection with George Floyd. There's nothing to empathize with. George Floyd got what he deserved. And by that I mean he got the consequences of his actions. Did he commit the crime for which he was being arrested? Absolutely. Did he have a lifetime of criminal activity and disregard for the rights of others? Certainly. Was he a bad person? Absolutely. George Floyd deserved what he got. And what you're seeing in this country is people who engage in behavior people who engage in criminal behavior, like Michael Brown, who assaulted that officer in his vehicle and got shot for his trouble. You're walking down the middle of the street. You're not supposed to be walking down the middle of the street. And when you're called out on it, you're not supposed to attack the police officer who is within his rights to say, get out of the middle of the street. And if you get shot after you try to whoop a police officer's ass, you deserve what you get. And Mike Brown deserved to die. And he did die. And they wanted to lionize him as a victim, but hours before, what is he doing? He's in a store stealing cigarettes or cigars, Swisher Sweets. Like, that's the level. He attacked a store clerk before he attacked that cop. This is a man who evinced disregard for other humans and for the standards of society as it pertains to appropriate behavior. And those standards are not racist. They apply to everybody. There's certain things that you cannot and should not do. They're just basic common sense. If you attack and physically assault another human being, they have a right to defend themselves. And a badge does not immunize you from that culpability. Yes, he had a right to shoot you. You coming into his vehicle and attacking him. George Floyd committed the crime for which he was being arrested. He resisted arrest, lawful arrest with plenty of probable cause. It took multiple officers to restrain him and handcuff him because of how crazy he was behaving. And later, everybody jumps on those officers like they're the problem. The problem is not those officers. The problem is people like George Floyd. There's a portion of the population, it's probably under 3%, that commit 2/3 to 70% of the crimes, especially the violent crimes. And it begins in the home. It begins with single mothers. It begins with mentally ill parents. It begins with parents who are themselves convicted of a violent crime, who have a record, who've been to prison, and who can't fulfill their duties as a parent because, guess what, they're incarcerated. So it falls to the extended family or the foster care system to raise your child. And we know that children who come out of foster care, who come out of like homes where a non-biological parent is their guardian, are more likely to be abused. It's called the Cinderella effect. They're more likely to have bad outcomes in terms of high school graduation rates, literacy rates, poverty, so on and so forth. And that begins with the choices made by their parents. They suffer the consequences of that generationally. It has nothing to do with their race. It has to do with the culture that's been marketed to their race or their ethnicity or their skin color. The reality of it is selling drugs, being a gang member, engaging in criminal behavior, engaging in out-of-wedlock sex and having illegitimate children as a result of it. That's been normalized for the black community in popular culture. That's what it is to be black. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with the color of your skin. It has to do with you embracing a culture that was marketed to you by television and movie executives, music executives. You embrace that as your blackness. And the reason they're marketing it to you is to destroy your community. To destroy you. If you embrace that identity and the behaviors that come with it, you will not have successful outcomes. If you embrace traditionalism and you reject modernity, that is, you get married, you get a job, you stay away from criminal activity, you're going to be fine. Married black households produce outcomes at the same. They produce positive outcomes at the same rate as married white households. You get married and you stay married, you're going to be fine. You get married and you get divorced, your children are more likely to have outcomes, become a Mike Brown or a George Floyd or a Dylan Ruth, so on and so forth. If you don't supervise your children and put them in their place and keep them where they belong, you're going to wind up like Kyle Rittenhouse. He crossed state lines with a firearm to act as security for a protest. And just like Renee Good, he had no business being there. I mean, he could legally be there with his gun. And the people who tried to attack him were wrong. But the reality of it is, his ass should have been home. His parents should have done their job. They said, no, you're not going to go look for trouble across state lines with your firearm. It's a recipe for disaster. And while he was ultimately acquitted, and he's a free man, look at his life. If Renee Good had stayed home and tended to what she was supposed to be tending to, which is her children, none of this would have happened. If Kyle Rittenhouse had stayed home and minded his own damn business instead of going in the middle of that shit show and that summer protest, he would have never been subjected to a murder trial. His parents would have never, his family and friends would have never been subjected to that. Like, people need to stay home, mind their own business for the most part. They need to avoid trouble. They need to recognize what trouble is. But they don't. Like, at the end of the day, that's the clear issue here. If Kyle Rittenhouse was my son, he'd have had a pat lip for his trouble. He wouldn't have made it out the front door with his firearm. He wouldn't have been going to these street protests. Parents need to supervise their children, even their adult children, especially when they have a bad idea. It's a terrible idea to go to one of these riots or these protests. It's a terrible idea to impede federal agents. It's a terrible idea to run your car at a federal agent. It's a terrible idea when you're being lawfully arrested to resist arrest. It's a terrible idea to use fentanyl and cocaine and meth. It's a terrible idea to pass off counterfeit money at a store. It's a terrible idea to physically assault a store clerk in order to get some Swisher Sweets. Like, all of these are things that these people did. It's a terrible idea to be part of a home invasion where you jam a gun into a pregnant woman's stomach and threaten her and her unborn child with a gun in order to coerce her to give up something you think is there that you're not lawfully entitled to. And if our justice system worked, George Floyd would be alive, but he'd be behind bars for life for doing that shit. And the rest of us who don't do that, who stay home, who go to work, who may have militant ideas in terms of like self-defense and what the government should and should not do, but we mind our business. We get tired of this. We're getting tired of being bombarded with these headlines where $9 billion of the money that we pay in taxes, our hard-earned money that's taken directly out of our paycheck, is being directed to this kind of nonsense. You need to 86 your shit if you're an elected official. We want those files released. And we don't care how many of your campaign donors and friends show up in those files as raping kids. We want the files released and we want them prosecuted. And we want the people who knew about this in law enforcement, who saw the unredacted files and who didn't prosecute it, we want them dealt with. Because there's no excuse for failing to prosecute this kind of behavior and for turning a blind eye to it. I don't give a damn if Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence asset of the CIA or the Mossad. He should have been under the jail. And if he is dead, I'm glad he's dead. I'm happy with that. That's a suitable outcome for what he's accused of, whether it's suicide or not. He deserved to die, and I'm happy that he's dead if he's dead. If he's not dead, you need to track him down and finish him. Like, straight up. And there needs to be transparency about it if he is alive. There needs to be transparency about what he did, who he did it with, and who enabled him in our government to get away with it. Because he had help. He had help in law enforcement. He had help in intelligence agencies. He had help in prominent citizens, wealthy people, powerful people, to get away with it as long as he did. To be charged with soliciting prostitution instead of what he actually did in Florida, which is raping children. That's what he should have been charged with. But he wasn't charged with that. This should have been dealt with in the 2000s. But it wasn't. And he kept doing what he was doing. And the people close to him kept doing what he was doing. They kept raping children and abusing children. I don't have any sympathy for anybody involved in this kind of behavior. I don't have any sympathy for people who defraud taxpayer dollars in the billions or even $1. I resent that because I work hard for my money. I pay taxes. And generally speaking, I've left stuff alone. I don't go to these protests because I look at them as magnets for trouble. These people are looking for trouble. And while they're entitled to protest, exercise their First Amendment rights, that's not what they're doing when they burn storefronts and they loot and they shoot. They should be shot. Law enforcement should not be sitting aside while they wreck private property and just watching them do it. And that's what I saw a few years back at these so-called mostly peaceful protests. That's what I saw. And I know a lot of other people saw it too. And we were all gaslighted. They said it was mostly peaceful. They said it was legitimate. Meanwhile, during the time that these protests were occurring, I could go to a liquor store or strip club, but I couldn't go to church. Again, there's your sign. There's your values indicator. You got a president who declares that he's not Christian, says that he's joking about not going to heaven. You got any number of indicators here that let you know that the people in charge of this country, the people that you voted for, don't share your values. Never have and never will. And ultimately, everything I've talked about on this live stream relates back to that. Values as a curb on your behavior, that you understand that what you do to other human beings, you're doing to God. That what you do to your government is a direct reflection on the values you share and you espouse. Rulers are to be a terror to good to evil works, not to good. That's what it says in Romans. And I submit to you that our rulers have become a terror to good works and an enabler and accessory to evil works. So I don't have any compunction about saying that our government needs to be done away with. We need to hit a hard reset. And it's not just our elected officials, it's our permanent bureaucracy that needs to be dealt with. And our shareholder class that funds these elections need to be dealt with, because they fund all the NGOs that are paying these agitators to come in and astroturf protest against ICE and the enforcement of the law. They're the ones who fund these organizations like the World Economic Forum, which plainly signal their intention to cull the population by 2/3 or more. They want you dead. And if you aren't dead, they want you locked away in 15-minute cities that you can't escape without their permission. And they want you in a social credit system so that if you express an opinion that they don't like, you can be debanked, deplatformed, and dehoused until you get in line. That's what they want. And what I believe in is free markets for morality and economics. And what I say to you is the free market won't be denied in terms of what it says about behavior, in terms of what it says about economics. Certain behaviors lead to success. Traditional marriage leads to success and outcomes for children and for the individuals in that marriage, the man and the woman. As long as they really, truly commit to it, and they have a value system rooted in God, and they understand that their marriage is a covenant with God, not a piece of paper from the state, their outcomes are markedly better than the alternative. Secular marriage doesn't work. It masquerades under the nomenclature of Christian marriage, but it isn't. It's Christian in name only. And these Christians out here, some of you watching who are part of the world, you have not repudiated the world. In terms of abstaining from the world's propaganda, which that's what entertainment is now. It's propaganda. It's intended to influence you towards tolerating deviancy and depravity, homosexuality, lesbianism, transgenderism. It is nudging you in that direction. It's nudging your children in that direction if you let them be exposed to it and you let them consume that messaging. Our children don't know how to read or write or reason. They don't know how to calculate and do basic math, but they know all the slogans. Black Lives Matter, sex work is real work, trans women are real women. They know all those slogans. But they don't know how to write a complete sentence, a good paragraph. They don't know how to check their bank account or manage their finances. They don't know any of that, but they know who to blame. They know to be ashamed of what God created them as, which is white male, white female. White guilt is something that is marketed to these people, and they accept it, they emulate it, and that's why that lesbian, Renee Good, was at that protest, and that's why she ran her car at that officer. That's why she's dead. That messaging has consequences. She felt guilt and empathy for Somalians who were guilty as sin of fraud and other crimes. And she decided to obstruct a federal officer doing his job because of that. Because the values that have been imparted to her are that lesbianism is normal, it's okay. The values that have been imparted to her are that she should be ashamed of her whiteness and she should be an ally of any person of color, regardless of what they've done. And those Somalians with those autism centers and those daycare centers, they are guilty as charged. They are running empty front businesses, and they are laundering money that they receive back to the politicians and back to the associates of the politicians who gave them that funding in the first place. And it's some kind of warped view that these white liberals hold, that these Somalians should be excused from it because they're black. If we get down to brass tacks, that's what it is. And I'm telling you, nobody, white, black, brown, Asian, should be excused when they steal $9 billion in taxpayer funds. I mean, that's pathetic. Like, the race coming into it is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter that they're black. It doesn't matter that they're Somalian. It doesn't matter at all. Like, at the end of the day, you committed a crime. And you don't see a lot of the white people who wind up getting shot for the crimes they commit and resisting arrest and making it potentially fatal for law enforcement to do their job. You don't see those people elevated to the level of martyrdom and even sainthood. You don't see them as canonized victims. Because in the white community, we believe if you fuck around, you're going to find out. That's why when we get pulled over and we know we're guilty of, like, speeding or whatever, most of us are compliant. We take the ticket. We earned it. We pay it, and we move on with our lives. That's the culture. Like, if you fuck around, you find out. Actions have consequences. Decisions have consequences. And when you want to engage in certain behaviors and you get caught engaging in those behaviors, guess what? You're going to find out. You're going to get arrested. All this talk about systemic racism and and whatnot. At the end of the day, are they guilty? Yes. They're guilty of sin. Who cares if the enforcement is skewed? The critical question here, are they innocent or are they guilty? Like, if you as a black person know that you're under heavier scrutiny because so many other black people engage in conduct that's egregious, it behooves you to recognize that reality, not to quibble about fairness and equity, but to understand if you do nothing, the police have nothing. They're not going to be able to frame you. And if they do, there's a process in place to establish your innocence. And don't get me wrong, any law enforcement officer who engages in that kind of behavior should suffer the consequence. If you put a man on death row because of prosecutorial misconduct or law enforcement engaging in behavior that constitutes a setup or a frame job, if you put somebody on death row, you should be on death row. You should face exit. You try to kill that man. And you try to do it by framing him for something he didn't do. I don't care if black or white. There's just a basic principle here. In terms of values, it's reciprocity. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, and he establishes his vengeance through the ministers of justice who are supposed to be a terror to evil works, not to good works. And some of those ministers of justice are framing people. Some of those ministers of justice are violating the very laws that they swear to uphold. They're not disclosing exculpatory evidence to the defense because they want a conviction. And if you convict an innocent person, that means that the guilty party is still roaming the streets, and that does not serve the public interest. You have effectively enabled a killer or a thief or a rapist to walk the streets with impunity for the time that individual serves a prison sentence for a crime that they did not commit. So I'm not saying that the police or the prosecutors are perfect. I advocate for strict penalties for any prosecutor or policeman, law enforcement agent at any level who frames an innocent person or who engages in illegal behavior. I believe they should be prosecuted with the utmost severity, and that they should receive the same sentence and the same punishment, the same consequence that their victim received. And if they put a man on death row to face the death penalty, and he was later acquitted, later found to be innocent, that whole situation should end with anyone who had a part in that innocent man's incarceration and possible death. They should be in the same position. They should serve time in the same amount, and they should be executed. Period. And ultimately, the goal should be that qualified immunity, or judicial immunity, qualified immunity, whatever you want to call it. Qualified immunity doesn't apply when you're framing people for crimes that they did not commit, and thereby you are arguably an accessory after the fact to the person who did commit the crime. So when I talk about free markets for morality, part of that is I believe the punishment should fit the crime and that consequences should be the same for everyone, regardless of your office or your position. And arguably should be more severe for public servants who abuse their office or who abuse their position. It should be more severe for them because societal order depends on them abiding by the law and playing fairly. The other side of it is, let's not overlook the obvious consequences and outcomes for demographics who engage in deviant behavior. 53% of all new HIV diagnoses annually are gay men. What the CDC wants to classify as men who have sex with men, because they don't want to call them what they are, which is homosexuals. They don't want to affix that label to them. 80% plus of all new syphilis diagnoses every year are gay men, men who have sex with men. If you look at the rate of mental illness in that community, if you look at the rate of childhood sexual abuse in that community, there's your signpost. It does not work as a lifestyle. It will never be the equivalent of an opposite sex relationship or marriage, especially not a marriage grounded in Christ and God, where the two individuals who are part of that marriage share the same values. It will never be that. It can't be. Because a same-sex marriage is the repudiation of all that marriage has ever stood for historically. It's a mockery of marriage. And it leads to outcomes like Renee Good. It leads to outcomes like these gay men who keep getting busted when they adopt children for sexually abusing those children, for passing them around to their gay friends. It is and has always been perversion and deviancy. It will never be the equivalent of a committed, monogamous, heterosexual relationship grounded in the common values that the two opposite sex individuals have in Christ. When you are a transgender human being and you go against your biological reality and how you were created by God to mutilate yourself in a sex reassignment surgery, that is a repudiation of the values that most of us have. It's a repudiation of reality. No surgery and no hormones and no change in the way you dress will ever make a man into a woman or a woman into a man. It is impossible. At the chromosomal level, you are still male or female. And for the select few, less than 0.5%, who have genetic abnormalities or chromosomal abnormalities like Klinefelter syndrome, what I would say to you is you are not representative of this issue, and you are not relevant to this issue. Yes, these things happen. They happen because of defects, and they should be called what they are, which is a genetic defect, a chromosomal abnormality, not because we hate people who suffer from Klinefelter syndrome, but because that's what it is. Something went wrong in utero. Something went wrong in your development in utero. And so when you were born, you had this abnormality that had physical repercussions for you. And I have all the compassion in the world for anybody who's suffering from one of these chromosomal abnormalities. But transgenderism, let's face it, it is gender dysphoria. It's not transgenderism. It's a mental illness whereby someone who is biologically male feels that they should be female, that they were born in the wrong body. That is a delusion. There's no such thing as being born in the wrong body. You were born in the right body. God gave you that body. Gender is not assigned to you at birth, other than by God's imposition of whatever biological sex you are. And for you to repudiate that, you're repudiating reality, you're repudiating God, and you're mutilating yourself. And there's, a lot of people who believe it's your body, your choice. I don't. I believe that transgenderism and reassignment surgery are a direct repudiation of God, and they should be banned. And there's no positive outcome for someone who has reassignment surgery. It doesn't alleviate their anxiety. It doesn't alleviate their suicidal ideations. it doesn't alleviate their dysphoria. And even if it did, it would still be wrong. And the fact that they are marketing this to children now. Let me tell you something. They don't care about people who have gender dysphoria. They see this as a market and as an economic opportunity. These hormones cost hundreds if not thousands of dollars. The reassignment surgery costs thousands of dollars. And if they can convince your children to undergo hormone therapy, to undergo reassignment surgery, they're going to make a lot of money. And that's why they're invested in this. They're invested in getting people to mutilate themselves and call it transgender, like reassignment surgery. And they're going to have a lifetime of treatment because these people, their so-called reconstructed vaginas aren't vaginas. They have to wear dilators. They have to have lifelong medical care, lifelong psychiatric care. And so they're piling on the expenditures and the money over and over and over again. And if they can get insurance to do it, to cover it, if they can get the government to mandate that insurance covers reassignment surgery, they are going to make billions of dollars off of these people mutilating themselves. As an added bonus, because many of these people are ideologically and spiritually inclined to believe that the repudiation of God and reality are ideal. What I would say to you is these people have a spiritual compulsion to undermine traditional values and mores, and also to undermine reality itself. And the way they do it is by bullying you into saying that trans women are women when they're not. They will cancel you, they will deplatform you, they will debank you. They want you to buy into their linguistic unreality. They want you to deny the consequences that are obvious in front of you. I have buried half a dozen of my gay friends. I've been to funerals. They commit suicide. They die of disease. I don't know a single gay person who doesn't have a mental health diagnosis. Period. It doesn't exist. I don't know a single gay person who can keep it together for a period of time who does not need constant psychiatric intervention and constant affirmation from everybody around them. If they were secure in themselves and who they were, they would not demand affirmation from people who are, morally opposed to their lifestyle. They wouldn't demand that affirmation because, they'd just be gay. But what they want is to ram all of that down the throat of everybody who's opposed to it morally. They don't want them to be able to speak about it, exercise their free speech. What they want is nothing short of the obliteration of an opposing opinion. That's just not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. You may be able to, run a baker out of business. You may be able to, engage in lawfare in states like Colorado and Oregon and Washington. But the day is coming where the rural areas in those states who have been disenfranchised by the urban areas like King County and the Denver metropolitan area and whatnot, who traditionally vote Democrat, the rural areas in those states are going to secede successfully. They're going to form their own communities, and they're going to bar you from disenfranchising them and canceling out their vote and their values. I think we've all had enough of these urban areas and the liberals that occupy them, because those are totalitarian people who want to override free speech, who want to cancel out traditional values, and they need to go. We need to go our separate ways. Because what we're seeing is a class of civilization and values in the form of this nonsense that happened recently with Renee Good and the way that she lives her life. There's two Americas. There's the America that believes in deviancy and depravity, and that children should be able to consent to sex with adults or, minor attracted person. There's two value systems here, and they're incompatible on a fundamental level. And the elephant in the room is, before women got the vote, before women got economic freedom and the ability to open their own accounts and have credit cards and whatnot, before all of that, we didn't have these issues. And you see these white liberal women virtue signaling by saying that their white tears don't matter. And they feel bad about what happened to Renee Good and what's happening to these Somali fraudsters. But their white tears don't matter because they come from a white woman. Women especially are susceptible to appeals to emotion. That's why we don't have them giving us input. Most of them can't think logically. They think emotionally. And the reality of it is, when they're lesbians and some man beat the hell out of them or abused them to make them into a lesbian, we have a crisis both of masculinity. We have a man who doesn't understand that his proper role is to protect women and children and provide for them. That's what he's built to do. That's his role and his responsibility. And we have a woman who's a victim of that kind of abuse, ultimately losing her ability to be attracted to men and ultimately becoming a lesbian and a liberal who rejects traditional norms, because guess what? The man who beat her ass professed all those traditional norms. And what I would say to any woman out there, listen, is it may seem like I'm chauvinist. I'm advocating for your disenfranchisement and for the rollback of all the gains that you made. But what I'm arguing for is that you should be protected and provided for. You should be in the home. And you should know what a bill is. Your household should be supported on a single income. What I'm arguing for is the reorientation of economics to favor the family and to favor traditional values. And what I'm saying to you ultimately is, if you were in that position, you wouldn't need to worry about a credit card or a bank account, because your man, your husband, would be meeting your needs and exceeding your needs, most of your wants, and you'd have a happier life, because that's what you're designed for by God. You are designed to tend a hearth and home. I don't know a single working woman who's truly happy. I certainly don't know any woman who's a breadwinner in her family who's happy or who respects her husband. I don't know any husbands who put their wives in that position because they want to play video games and smoke weed and not meet their responsibilities and better themselves. I don't know husbands like that and boyfriends like that, baby daddies like that. I don't know any of them who are truly happy. You can only find happiness in your purpose as you are designed by God, as your purpose is designed by God. And men and women have different roles. And the government has sought to erode that. They've eroded that with welfare for single mothers, with on-demand abortion. And they've been marketing those things to erode traditional marriage for decades. And they've been largely successful. Look at what's happened. Even in marriage, these women think that, they're equal to the man or the same as the man. Not equal to. You're all equal in the eyes of God, but you have different complementary roles. If you stay in those roles and you fulfill the purpose that God has for you, that God has designed you to accomplish, you're fine. Everything falls into place. But the reality of it is, the traditional family unit has to compete with the government trying to eradicate it and deracinate traditional values. So when you send your children to a public school classroom, they get a competing value system in that classroom that's in direct odds, in direct contradiction with the values that you're trying to instill in your home. Schools should stick to reading, writing, and arithmetic, and when, our students graduate and they're not literate, they're not proficient in math, they can't comprehend what they read, they can't write a complete sentence, not even a simple sentence, and they can't write a full paragraph or a cohesive, coherent paragraph. And they spent 12, 13 years in government schools. And we rank in the 30s. We rank behind developing countries in terms of educational outcomes and performance. And you want to tell me that there isn't a problem when your children can't read, write, and do arithmetic. They have to take remedial classes if they go to a community college to catch up on what they should have been learning in high school. You want to tell me that that isn't a problem, and that isn't a product of the schools trying to be value centers or indoctrination centers rather than educational institutions. They shouldn't teach your children what to think. They should help you teach your children how to think. And the problem is most of you watching this don't know how to think. Not for yourselves. You don't know how to go and get the information for yourself or how to think critically about the information that's on the internet, most of which is non-factual and propaganda. That's the reality of it. And you look, this is a trusted source. Why? What about it makes it a trusted source? Half the things that I look at on the front page of Google are utter bullshit. Demonstrably bullshit. And the reason I know that is because I actually delve into the statistical realities that underlie these things. I look at data, and I can comprehend it because of my education. Because thank God I grew up in the 90s, and I graduated in 2001, back when grades were actually real. I could tell you that as a teacher, one of the things that shocked me when I filled in for one of my colleagues was the grading scale, where you could make a 30 raw score in this class, and it would be scaled up to a 70. It's the district's policy in most districts that only a certain number of children can make a D or below. So you have to push the grades artificially. Because every year that I taught, the kids who came into my classroom were not on grade level. So I had to play catch up. They didn't know how to do the 4 basic operations in mathematics. That is multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. They didn't comprehend PEMDAS, PEMDAS, parenthetical, exponent, multiply, divide, addition, subtraction, from right to left. They didn't comprehend any of that. And this was something I learned in elementary school. They didn't know the times tables. I knew mine by the end of first grade. We had to stand up and recite it on a clock. We had a certain number of seconds with which to recite all your times tables, 1 through 12. And we were expected to be able to do that. We weren't going to pass. They didn't socially promote like they do now. They weren't going to scale your grade up so it made it look like they were actually doing their job. And that's really what's at stake here. It has nothing to do with the best interests of the students when they scale a raw score of a 30 to a 70. They're covering their ass to try and make it look like their students are actually proficient. And then when the student takes a graduation test and he can't pass it, or his standardized test scores indicate that he's multiple grade levels below the grade level he should be as a high school senior. Ultimately, the schools are just trying to make it look like they did the job when they didn't. But that student who isn't proficient in any academic subject or area, who isn't on grade level, he can tell you all about social justice. He can tell you all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. He can tell you about fairness. He can tell you about systemic racism. He can spout whatever he has been indoctrinated in chapter, verse, and line. Like, that's the reality of it. As I stand here before you on this podcast, what I say to you is, ultimately, this comes back to values. When I was in a classroom, I had a job to do. And that job was not to offer my opinion about any number of things or pontificate on stuff. The job was to teach the subject area and to make children more proficient in that area. That's the reality. That's your basic job as an educator. But most educators aren't interested in teaching their subject. They want to pontificate about their opinions in that context. And they want to indoctrinate these kids. And the administrators and everything are fine with it. What you see in schools in per student spending is a growth in administration and paraprofessional staff. What you do not see is a growth in teacher compensation or an ability to attract better qualified candidates with higher salaries. Because the money goes to administrative bloat. The money goes to indoctrination. The reality of it is, that's at the federal level. It's from the top down. And so what I would say to you is that, again, it goes back to values. I'm responsible in the classroom for what goes on in that 50 minutes. I'm responsible for using that time efficiently to increase the proficiency in a subject area of my students. That's any job you have a specific job and a specific mandate. You're not there to offer your opinion. You're there to accomplish an objective. The problem in our society is people bring their opinions to work. And they think that the workplace is a place to express their identity. Be it Christians, professing Christians, gay people, secularists. And they spend a great deal of time in that workplace contributing to something called culture. And when I worked in a corporate office, that was something I absolutely hated. Well, what the fuck is your culture? What do you even mean by that? And what it usually meant was that some hippie from HR with a bunch of tattoos was telling us that we need to be inclusive, that we needed to accept the overt expressions of identity from our colleagues that were in hostility to our values. And we couldn't speak on that. You could be as in your face as you wanted to be if you were some fat lesbian or homosexual or pansexual or transgender. You could be as in your face as you want to be. Anybody who had anything to say about it in response, no matter how much you were antagonizing them, they weren't being inclusive. And what these people don't get is how exclusionary that is to people who just want to come to work and do their jobs, and people who don't believe any of this nonsense. And you go and you look for another job, you get another job, and eventually this slithers into your workplace, and they hire somebody with tattoo sleeves and, wild, unnatural hair color accents. That person comes in and lectures you about tolerance, about diversity, about equity and inclusion, about systemic racism, about implicit bias and microaggressions. And none of which has anything to do with your job or your performance or the objective that you're out to achieve at that job. It doesn't make the company money. In fact, it costs the company money. Because the workplace becomes this sort of balkanized ideological battlefield that employees have to navigate. And certain people are allowed to speak freely about their beliefs and their private lives inside of work. And ultimately, if I come to work and I talk about being a heterosexual male or a white male, that's seen as inappropriate. That's seen as bringing my private life into the workplace in an inappropriate and aggressive manner. And it's seen as not being inclusive, but these people in the DEI train, the LGBTQIA, the minorities, so on and so forth, they can bring all that to work. And if I react, I'm a bigot. Ultimately, the workplace has been transformed into a place where work doesn't get done, but antagonism does. And when you talk about team cohesion, working together for a common goal that actually makes the company money, we don't do that. We spend all of our time discussing things that have nothing to do with work whatsoever. We have seminars and classes and trainings that we have to go to. And ultimately, the workplace becomes a place where somebody like me is just fed up and says, I'm going to go my own way. It's just not worth it to me. I'm going to make money on other things. And I'm not going to spend my time, which is finite, in these classes or these trainings that ultimately have nothing to do with making money. For myself, for my family, they don't have anything to do with making money. And they're contrary to my value system, which is you check all that at the door. I am not at work to proselytize or witness to people, even though I'm a Christ follower. I'm at work to work. I'm at work to make money. You check all that other shit at the door. I'm at work not to talk about my wife or my family or my sex life or my sexual preferences or any other form of identity that I might feel I'm compelled to talk about. Work is not the appropriate place for that. Work used to be a place where sex, race, religion, and politics were topics that weren't indulged in. We talked about sports if we talked about anything. We talked about, minutia that was inoffensive. What are your plans for the weekend? Well, my kids got a ball game. I'm going to have a cookout. I'm going to see my family. Innocuous things, not inflammatory things. And what I submit to you is they've transformed work into a place where freaks run the floor. And when I say freaks, I want to be very clear what I'm saying. I'm saying people whose entire identity is bound up in who they sleep with, who they're having sex with. That's their identity. And they want you to know that they're sleeping with somebody of the same sex. They want you to know that their biological sex isn't necessarily who they are, even though it is. A man wants to wear a dress. He's clearly a man, and he says he's transitioning. So he gets to go into the women's restroom as a man, no matter how it makes the women feel. I've seen that happen in multiple workplaces. What I have not seen is a female to male transitioner who went to the men's restroom to use the bathroom. The transgender movement ultimately is largely about biological males who want to be in women's spaces for whatever reason. They get off on the discomfort of women. And the great irony of it is these white women created this environment, in this reality. They wanted this, and now that they got it, they don't like it. Like, at the end of the day, this is the system that you advocated for, and then when one of these freaks comes in the bathroom or the locker room with you, then you have a problem with it. But you voted for this. You supported this. And what I'm saying to you is, all of it ties back to your values. If you have traditional values and you have common sense and you accept reality as it is, you accept biology as the determinant of sex, and you accept gender roles that are tied to biological sex and the innate differences between men and women at the biological level. Try as I might, or try as she might, my wife will never get me pregnant. She can try all day. I've encouraged her to. It's a good time for me. But she'll never get me pregnant. Biologically, that is impossible. Like, straight up. My wife will never be able to physically lift as much weight as I can. She's designed differently. I'll never give birth. My wife can and has, but I won't, because I'm not built for that. She is. Men and women are different. They have complementary roles, and a man's role is to protect and love his wife as Christ protected and loved and gave himself for the church. That's what it says in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. And ultimately, what I'm seeing in society is this determination to make men women and women men, and to have that codified in the law. And it hasn't worked. It's not going to work because it can't work. And if you have traditional values, those traditional values are rooted in reality. Reality as just observed and translated through common sense. Like, it's just that simple. You have a working wife. When you come home as a man and you try to check all your workplace problems at the door and just have a peaceful evening with your wife, guess what? Your wife needs to vent about the shit that's going on in the workplace, because she's not built to compartmentalize. She's not built to handle all of that stress. She wants the workplace to accommodate her differences and to be built around her, but that's just not the way things work. You can try to feminize the workplace all you want, but if you do it at the risk of your competitiveness as a company, at the risk of your core objectives, which is sales is survival. You have to make money. There is no priority higher than that at work. The reason you were hired is to make more money for your employer than he expends paying you, to make multiples more money. This is common sense. Anything that comes at the expense of that is going to be a problem. Like, it's going to be a problem for the company's competitiveness and survival. Every company I know that has undergone all this DEI sensitivity training, everything, they've invested in that. They've had people come to tell us that whites are automatically racist and that white males are the worst thing that ever happened. Whiteness has to be abolished. All this nonsense, you're sitting there thinking that you're having like a stroke at work when you hear it. All those companies that I worked for in the past, those startups who embrace this as opposed to just having a ruthless focus on their outcomes and their bottom line, all of them have gone out of business. They don't exist. Because their business model was ideological rather than practical. And ultimately, any company that allows this to slither into its workforce and to polarize its workforce against each other, they do it at the risk of their bottom line. Straight up. And they're going to go out of business. It takes care of itself, but, the sad part is the people who aren't polarized, who are practical rather than ideological, who are just there to do their job, make money, support their family, they have to go find another job. And that other job is likely going to have more of this bullshit involved in it. It's going to have more of this DEI nonsense. And quite frankly, one of the reasons I left the workforce, I was tired of hearing all of this. One of the reasons I broke away, I started doing my own thing exclusively, is that it just wasn't worth it to hear about white male privilege and toxic masculinity and how only whites can be racist. This critical theory nonsense. And how we all needed to support inclusion, even if the inclusion spoken of is validating something that runs contrary to our values, like homosexuality or transgenderism. Like the reality, that's what you have to do to fit in the workplace. You have to validate that. You can't say that you don't support it, that you're not an ally to it. It makes you uncomfortable to have some man in a dress sitting next to you because it's inappropriate. That it makes you uncomfortable to have a man in a dress or a man in women's clothing going in the bathroom to take a dump when you're a woman. That makes you a bigot. And you need to get over it, and you need to get over your privilege and all this other. No. They're freaks. And they need to go back in the closet where they belong. And these racial neurotics whose entire identity is their skin color or their ethnicity, and they want to bring that shit to work, they're freaks too. Whether they're white, whether they're black, whether they're Asian, whether they're, Hispanic, I don't care what it is. You need to check that shit at the door. You need to do your job. And you need to do nothing else. Nobody cares about your skin color unless you make it an issue. Nobody cares about your ethnicity unless you make it an issue. And there are white people who come to work and make that shit an issue, and they need to be fired too. Like, your identity when you're at work is that of an employee who's tasked with a specific objective to make money for the company. It's that simple. And if you can't accept that, and you have to inject other things into that are ideological rather than pragmatic and practical to the company's bottom line, you need to go. And more companies are starting to say that. More and more companies are starting to get that principle. And ultimately, more and more companies are starting to grow up. And with respect to that. We've only got one person watching. Now, a lot of you are going to watch this later. And I've gone for 3 hours now. Which is, I try to be concise and everything, but this was intended to be more of a live stream rant about a lot of things in our country and in our lifetime. And the Tricast is probably going to be that format from here on out. It's just going to be me, ranting and raving about things that I don't like. So be warned about that. With the Tricast live stream, we focus more on politics and current events in this live stream. Probably going to focus more on other specific areas relevant to IRA in the next stream. And we'll go from there. I appreciate everybody who watch, everybody who offers any kind of commentary or feedback. I hope the volume on this is better. I did try to adjust it to where you could hear me more. I've been in the yellow and the red most of this podcast. So we will go from there. And God bless you. Have a good weekend. I'll talk to you later.